There we go. Good afternoon and welcome to a special workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is November 12th, Thursday. It is 2 p.m. I'd like to start with actually I have a couple of things to say before we get into our agenda items. I'd like to call this workshop to order, and then due to COVID-19, the Public Washington Proclamation 20-28, the physical meeting location will be limited to city council meetings or city council members and certain staff members. Today's meeting may be viewed live via YouTube or cable channel 10. In addition, to listen to the live meeting, the public may call 623-404-9000 and enter the meeting ID number, which is 149-766-1467. This is for audio only. Public comment is not normally taken at workshop meetings. Please note, with the high winds we are experiencing today, there is a potential for technical difficulties due to power outages or cable and internet interruptions. If this occurs, we may take a short recess in order to resolve any issues. If we are unable to continue the live feed, we will post the recording of the meeting on YouTube and cable channel 10. Some council members and city staff are participating via teleconference. The council members and staff sitting in city council are all physically distanced at least 6 feet apart and will be wearing masks when they are not speaking. At the request of council, we are holding this special workshop to provide more information and an additional opportunity for council discussion on the 2021-2022 biennial budget. I want to thank our staff for accommodating the request from council to be present in council chambers for this workshop and our workshop meeting on November 18th. Per the governor's recent guidelines and on the advice of the city's legal counsel, the maximum occupancy in council chambers is limited to 10 people. Staff has provided a space for each of our 7 council members, myself, the city clerk, and our meeting videographer, with all other staff attending virtually. Attending in person from the council today are Council Member Servadius, Council Member Mack, Council Member Goebel, and Council Member Heisen. Due to the requirements related to COVID-19, our meetings remain accessible to the public only virtually at this time. Please note, our regular council meeting on November 17th will have council members attending virtually only. Moving forward, we will maintain the virtual meeting format. Reported cases of COVID-19 are rising once again, and we need to do our part to keep our council members and staff healthy, especially as we enter the cold and flu season. I want to thank the public, city council, and staff for working with us as we adapt to the requirements related to COVID-19. More detailed about COVID-19 and its impact on city services can be found on our website, www.oakharbor.org. So with that, we will move on then to the agenda at this time. And we are going to start today's agenda with the Mayor's preliminary 21-22 biennial budget. And I think we have our City Finance Director with us, Dave Goodman, and I'm going to turn that over to Dave at this time.
All right, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen so we can start the presentation. Here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, this is the Mayor's preliminary 2021-2022 biennial budget overview for November 12th, 2020 workshop. I'll first start by talking a little bit about fund balance. There was some talk at the last workshop about where we stand with fund balance, and if maybe the new finance director can take a closer look into it and try to explain, the fund balance in its totality. So just to give a review of what fund balance, how governmental funds fund balance works, you have the beginning year's fund balance, which is also the same as the previous year's ending fund balance. And then you add the projected revenues into that to get your total resources available. Then from there, you subtract your expenses to get the ending fund balance. And ending fund balance is split into three general categories. You have the unspendable and restricted categories, which per GASB 54 accounting rules, those aren't shown in the budget. Those are in the CAFR only, but I'm going to show them to you in the next few slides just so you can take a look at them. Then we have the reserves, which were developed by City Council policy. And then we have the unreserved fund balance, or also known as the available fund balance. So for governmental funds, the next slide shows the general fund and the stabilization fund together, since that's funded out of the general funds. You'll see at the top, I'm going to use my pointer, the top has the beginning fund balance per the 2018 audited CAFR. This is the ending fund balance of 2018, which is also the beginning fund balance of 2019. That's about $10 million. Then you take your revenues that actually came in, about 16 million, plus your transfers in, to get total revenues of 16.2 million. So your total resources are 16.2 plus 10.1, which is about 16.3 million. Then you subtract out your expenditures, which are in this area: personnel expenses, operation and maintenance, capital outlay, and so on. The total expenditures were $15.6 million for 2019. And then you get your change in fund balance, which is really your revenues minus expenses. This is your revenues, this is your expenses, and the difference is 642,000. You would then add 642 to the beginning fund balance to get $10.725 million. That's split up into three general categories. You have the unspendable restricted category, which is only 134,000. You have the reserves category, which is the GO bond requirement, capital facilities, excess stabilization cash, sleeper road proceeds, your operating policy, and then this is the other fund, stabilization fund, for a total reserves of $6.5 million. The remainder that's not reserved is $4.1 million. The next column shows the amended 2020 budget, and the column next to that shows our projections for 2020. They both start at the same beginning fund balance. This is what we budgeted for revenues, $15.2 million. This is what we're projecting, 15.3, and that's because we did a little bit better on the sales taxes, and we also had the CARES grant amendment as well. Expenditures, you have personnel services of a few $100,000 under budget. You have operating and maintenance about $400,000 under budget, mostly because of CARES Act expenditures came in under budget. You have some capital outlay. We kept the interfund charges and transfers out the same. We'll know more what these look like when we do our year-end closing process. So taking together all these projections, we have expenditures of $15.8 million. Revenues minus expenditures is negative $457,000. So we're looking to use $457,000 of fund balance. That's opposed to what was budgeted at 1.3 or $1.25 million. So that is better than budget, but it's still using fund balance. So we're looking at having ending fund balance of $10.3 million in the general fund. Again, that's split by the unspendable restricted. We don't know what these are going to look like in the future. It all depends on the year-end process. So I use the same number going across. We have the GO bond requirement that doesn't change. We have the capital facilities policy that doesn't change. We have the excess stabilization cash, which it's not being projected to be spent in 20, so we kept it at the same number. But you'll see in the future years, we budgeted some $400,000 to buy down the utility rates. We have sleeper road proceeds that we're looking to spend a little bit of it in 2021. We have the operating policy, which is the calculation based on budget, and the stabilization fund, which is also a calculation based on budget. So the total reserves is $6.7 million. And the difference, because we didn't use as much fund balance as budget, the unreserved fund balance is 3.4 as opposed to what was budgeted at 2.6. So then we take that number, what we're projecting, and move it forward to 21. We go through all the same calculations, and we were looking at using $1.36 million of fund balance. that's due to revenues being pretty much on target. There's no CARES Act money projected for 21, so you really have to go back to this number, and we have a slight increase, about 1% or so, based on this number. We have transfers in based on various things that are going on that were approved in the budget. Our personnel is up slightly. There's no COLA budgeted, so this is really based on steps. Operation and maintenance is 3.35 based on the needs. We have some capital outlay, which Jessica went over in her presentation last week. Interfund charges are based on calculations, and transfers out is also based on mostly capital projects. That's how we got to this budgeted number of expenditures. So if you take the change in fund balance that's budgeted of 1.362, subtracted from the beginning fund balance, you'll get 8.904. Again, we split it up into its different categories. The excess stabilization cash, 400,000, is going to be transferred out to buy down the utility rates. You can see the transfer going out right there. And a little bit's being spent here on the sleeping room proceeds, and then these are based on calculations. So then we have an unreserved fund balance of $2.56 million. And then we do the same calculations again for 22. It looks like we're going to be budgeted to use about $700,000. That gets subtracted from that number. You'll get 8.2, and then we split it up again. And then we have unreserved fund balance going to $1.9 million. Now, the numbers that you saw 2 weeks ago that Tally had in her presentation, those were the budgeted fund balance numbers, which is a subset of unreserved fund balance. Those calculations were done off the previous year's budgets. So that's what we have in the budget, but this is just so you have the big picture and so you have a full view of what all the fund balance looks like for the general fund and stabilization fund. The next governmental fund that we took a look at was the streets fund.
David, let's back
we
up.
do the same type of calculations with the streets fund.
David?
We have a beginning fund balance of 2.7. We have revenues coming in. We have expenditures going out.
David?
Hey, David,
Can we pause?
Oh.
can you pause for
go
just?
back? Let's do it while we're on it. Let's go ahead and go back to the other one, and now that you explained it, let's allow the council to ask any
Oh, yeah,
questions they
sorry
have.
about that.
Okay.
Do you have any questions on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess just semantics-wise, because I do have a lot of questions, are we going to go through each of these funds? Okay, so I'll just try and keep them appropriate to each section. First
Oh, yeah,
question.
we're going to go through the governmental funds tonight. And there's 3 governmental funds. It's this fund, the streets fund, and the senior service fund.
Okay, well, those are my top first 3. I've got questions on all of them. So on the general, well, the first question, I guess, you're referring now to an unreserved fund balance. All through our packet, it talks about an unbudgeted fund balance. Those are the same thing, correct?
The unreserved fund balance is based on CAFR numbers, or based on our projected CAFR numbers. The budgeted fund balance is just based on the previous budget and calculations based on that base from the previous budget. So it is going to be different, but the budgeted fund balance is going to fall within this part, the unreserved fund balance.
Let me try it with the mask pulled down a little bit. Throughout our packet, everything ends with unbudgeted fund balance. Is that the same as unreserved fund balance?
Unbudgeted fund balance?
This talks about
Yeah.
using unbudgeted fund balances, for example, page 54, equipment
You go to that.
repair fund is what I'm just looking at. Below the pie graphs, well, almost all of these refer to unbudgeted fund balance. Is that the same thing as unreserved fund balance?
I'm going to go to that page 54. Let me take a look.
And I can jump to the general fund,
Real
which would
quick.
be page,
I don't see it on page 54.
how about page 52, storm drain fund, unbudgeted fund balance, negative 663,000, I'm rounding.
Okay, let me go up. Scroll up. Let's go. All right, I'll do it the old-fashioned way. Nope.
I just want to make sure I'm using the same language as I've gone through all of these.
Trying to get into it. It's not getting me to get into this.
David, I would be happy to answer that question if you would like me to.
Tally, I'm just trying to find
Yeah.
myself with this one.
Yeah, Joel, I think a better way to look at it would be, or more, it's actually a subset of the budgeted. The unbudgeted fund balance would be relating to those items that we had reserved. So unreserved fund balance is not the same as unbudgeted fund balance. It would be a subset of budgeted fund balance.
unbudgeted fund balance is a subset of budgeted fund balance?
David, could you go back to the screen with the notes on it? So what would be unbudgeted would be in those total reserves section, right above unreserved fund balance. So this would be unbudgeted. This would be what I called unbudgeted fund balance.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, I don't know how to get my head around that one. It's just, I'll hold on that because I had a whole bunch of questions and I don't want to take up a bunch of time. But here's, I guess, what really stood out to me then as we're looking at this fund. I'm looking at general fund, and I apologize for having my mask down, but I just want it to be clear. So we have an ending fund balance in 2019, and I'm going to round, of 2.3 million. Correct?
Are you talking about what's on this slide, or are you talking about in the
I was
budget
going
itself? 'Cause
through-
the budget
well-
itself shows 2.3 million as the budgeted amount, right? But I don't have that open right now. I only have this slide open.
I'm going off the packet that I've had here, the large printed out version of the mayor's preliminary budget. So I'm
Okay,
looking
you're
at
looking at
page
that.
44 in our printed one and also the one we received digitally.
All right. Let's take a look.
It's going back to the 25,000 that was in
Oh, yes.
Sally's
yes, yes, I have that.
presentation. Yeah, page 44 of the mayor's preliminary budget.
Going there right now, 44. 44. Yeah, the unbudgeted fund balance, it's a different terminology than I'm used to, but yeah, unbudgeted fund balance are the reserves.
So on page 44 of the mayor's preliminary budget, I'm looking at an ending fund balance for 2019 of 2.3 million. I'm rounding $2,281,623. Do you see that, Mr. Goldman?
Ending fund balance. Yeah, the ending fund balance is just a subset of all the fund balances. I see what you're saying, yeah. So
Okay,
ending fund
Mike,
balance,
so-
I see 744, 678. That is a subset of the unreserved fund balance, which I'm showing you on the screen over here.
So I'm gearing
That
up.
can- That's a calculation based on the previous year. They're looking at what was used.
Mr. Goldman,
Yeah, go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me finish my question. On page 44, I'm looking at an ending fund balance of 2.3 million. I'm going to round. Can my peers see that? Yeah, yes. Okay. At the end of 2022, 3 years later, well, 4 years, I guess, 4 years, we're down to I'm going to round 26,000. And I went through and looked at all of the funds, and some of it makes sense with capital projects, and I want to go through each of these, but that is very concerning to me. Can we walk through why that is? Because if almost 70% of our general fund is public safety, fire, and police, and those are personnel costs, this is not sustainable to use up that much beginning fund balance unless we have a miracle of growth or sales tax or real estate excise tax on the horizon. How do we reconcile as a council going from 2.3 to 26,000, 2.3 million to 26,000 just in this fund?
Yeah, that's the use of fund balance over the 21 and 22. It's 1.362 is proposed to be used in 21, and 686,000 is proposed to be used in 22. But the beginning fund balance number that you see there is not the total picture of fund balance. We have reserves, but we also have other unreserved fund balances, so it's actually larger than that number. That's just the number that was put in the budget based on previous budget calculations that was calculated when they put the budget together.
So let's assume we want to keep our reserves as reserves, whether it's, it sounds like 16.67% has kind of been an average 2 months of operating capital. we're going to assume those reserves are still there. If we're balancing a budget, well, let me put it this way. If we all made $40,000 a year in the room and we had 10,000 in savings, and the only way we can get through next year is we're still going to make 40-ish, but we have to spend all 10 in savings. What do we do the next year?
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is that we do have more fund balance that's not in the reserves. You won't have to touch the reserves at all, and you'll have more than $25,000 in your non-reserved fund balance. That was the point of the other slide. We actually have more than this. And yes, but you're right. The use of fund balance is budgeted to be spent in 21 and 22. That is true. But this $25,000 or this $26,000 number is just the number that's used in the budget. It's not the total look at the fund balance. It's not, and not even touching reserves, not even the total look at the unreserved fund balance.
So, David, let me try to answer a few questions here, because you're raising some good questions here, Councilmember Servadius. One thing we did look at, the 25,000 is compared to the budget cycle the year last cycle. We estimated 700,000 is what we would have at the end of that number. So that's the reason why I provided about $600,000 in cuts. So you can peg to that number. Fortunately, we've usually been coming in much higher. We look at 2019 was budgeted to use quite a lot of the fund balance and then came in much more swinging the black. So our revenue's usually been running quite a lot higher. We don't know exactly where we are, but he already knows that he's pretty sure that 2020 is going to come in better and not utilize the deficit that we did. Now he's recalculated it now and he's not using as much in 2020. But when we did it before with Tally's projection, she uses the budget number as the drawdown, but we know it's not going to do that. So certainly you're right on the concerns, and those are adjustments you can make to the budget if you so desire.
So I guess I'm going to have to, because this is the only document I had, I mean, I know we have this in front of us now in the most recent packet, but this is the one I've been looking at and studying. So I'll let you work through this, Mr. Goldman. I'll just say one other general comment, since we're on these three governmental funds, that concerns me is the sales tax projections. I know on page 6 of this printed document and the digital document we had that Mr. Bailey or whoever typed that said that sales taxes he expects to remain strong, and we've had that presented to us a couple times. Ms. Boyer, when she did her presentation, she said after consultation with the Island County assessor that they expected we increased our sales tax projections. And to me, that's a little concerning. When you look in here on page 34, we've got an influx in the graph in 17 and 18. We've got at least one retailer in the room, but, no, sorry, page 34, it shows an increase in 17 and 18, and that's attributed to the wastewater treatment plant, which I think is fair. I think if you took a look at this, we may have had an increase probably in 15, 16, 17, and 18 because of the size of that project. We dipped down in 19, but then we jump right back up in our projections for 21, 22. And I'm just very hesitant. I said it before, I'd rather be overly conservative in our projections as a council and how we budget, and then be wrong as we see those 2021, 2022 numbers come in. But when we have this influx due to a $150 million project, the likes of which Oak Harbor, isn't necessarily going to see again anytime soon, I just think it's a little overly optimistic in the current climate to jump up our sales tax numbers for 21 and 22. So I don't know if you want to touch on that, Mr. Goldman, and then I'll hold my questions for a moment.
Well, there's different ways to look at the projections for the sales taxes. I mean, I didn't work on these projections for the sales taxes, but I did work on other projections for COVID and for beyond COVID. And it looks like for this particular year, we're going to be doing a little bit better than budget for the sales taxes. And unless we have another shutdown, or unless, there's a big delay in that vaccine coming out and the country getting back to normal, it doesn't look like sales taxes are going to take another big dip like they did in the middle of this year. Actually, it wasn't even that long for the middle of this year. We thought it was going to be longer, but it ended up only being a few months for a lot of the places in Washington State. So, I mean, just looking at these sales tax projections, I don't think that they're that out of line.
All right, thank
Because if you
you.
go back to 2017 and you look at 2021, you'll see that that's 4 years. But the increase in sales taxes is only about $170,000, which is a pretty low percentage for a 4-year increase as things changed, more people moved in, more retail businesses opened up and so on. So I'm not seeing this not being conservative, just looking at those numbers.
Did I hear you say more people moved in and more businesses opened?
Well, since 2017. Now, things are kind of tight right now, but if things go the way that everybody's hoping them to go in 2021 and so on, we should be able to get to these sales tax numbers.
Thank you.
We have a couple of hands up. Councillor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. Can we get back to and I understand totally the reserve fund balance versus the beginning fund balance to an extent, but let's first talk back to that slide number on the slide number 44 in the mayor's preliminary budget, which I understand is not the same slide what we're looking at today, but this has also been a slide that I've been spending a little bit of time on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I guess maybe this is what you're stating, but I guess I'm going to state it in layman's terms. The beginning fund balance is a carryover balance because we have corrections within our budget throughout the year. We have true ups, and at the end of the year, you finish up with a true up, and there's a fund balance at the end of the true up, and that's just a dollar amount you've been carrying forward from true ups, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's how they calculated it.
Okay, so it's not a real number. It's just a balance being carried forward from previous years of true ups. But even if it's not a real number, the math still has to add up. So explain to me on that chart why we end up at the amended 2020 with an ending fund balance of $1,016,000, but then proposed 2021, we all of a sudden come in with a beginning fund balance of $2,075,000. Looks like we made $1 million somewhere in there.
Well, those numbers were calculated based on projections that I think Tally worked on. So she was looking at 20 and she was just making a projection based on how the actuals were coming in for revenues and expenditures. And that's how that number came about for the proposed number for 21. The number for 20 was just was a budgeted number. So when she did her calculations, she came up with a number based on her projections for the beginning.
Well, yeah, we've got an amended 2020 ending fund balance of $1,016,771.
Yeah.
But then we go to a beginning fund balance the next day in 2021 of $2,075,000. I don't know how did that carry that way.
It's because the projections for 20 were for the expenditures to be under what was budgeted and the revenues to be over what was budgeted. And you could see that based on my slide as well. If we can go back to my slide. Oh, I can't share right now.
Lisa can do that. Go ahead. All right.
All right.
So what you're saying is the proposed 2021 is based upon the 2020 budget, not the amended 2020 ending fund balance on that slide.
Yeah, 2020 was based on budget, what was amended for the budget, whereas 21, the beginning fund balance was based on projections.
Okay, so that's really not an amended 2020, that's a budgeted 2020, but the proposed 2021 is actually based upon an amended.
Yeah, 2021 is based on our projections for 20.
Got it. So that's really not an amended 2021 ending fund balance. That sounds like it's a budgeted.
Yeah, it's not a budgeted number. It's based on what we actually think is going to happen by the end of this year.
Okay.
David, may I add one thing that might help?
Okay.
The word amended at the top means that this budget is not the budget that went to council because we've had several amendments. So if you were to look back at what was an approved budget by council, the revenues might be different and the expenditures might be different. Since we adopted this budget, we've made several amendments. So that's why it says amended at top. And so these are now what our current budget is at this date. So that's what that column represents, what our budget is for 2020 today.
Got it. So it's actually an amended budgeted 2020, not an amended.
Yes, not an amended fund.
2020.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, we
That's all I have.
also have a hand up from Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Goldman, when you talk about interfund charges, those are charges when a department uses resources from other departments and you add up, like if you had to do legal or they had to add in some police help or whatever, you come up with an amount or a bill and then that department has to pay for it.
Yeah, it's done in a few different departments. I mean, all the internal service funds are done in the public works area, and the allocations, the interfund allocations for all the general fund services are done by finance. But basically, you know, if you have vehicles and the vehicles need service, or they need, we need to put money away into the sinking fund for reserve for replacements, that would be a charge out from those interfund, you know, those internal service funds to every other fund. And the general fund takes a look at the services that it provides, and it comes, you know, and it charges out to the other departments for its services. So it kind of goes both ways.
Okay, so if a department was questioning why that seemed to increase so much, they could go to the finance department and find a list of what they're spending that they didn't realize they were spending?
Yeah, it's all part of the true-up process. So yeah, they can easily just call up the finance department, talk to us, and we'll just show them exactly what happened so they can get a better understanding of why, you know, what the cost drivers were for those allocations, for the ones that come out of finance.
Okay, because it seemed like there were some of them where it was projected to be 80,000 and all of a sudden it's, I don't know, I'm just pulling numbers up, 150,000. And it's like, whoa, what happened to this? When all the years previously, they were like 60,000 or 70,000. So 80,000 is like right in there. Then all of a sudden it takes a huge jump.
Yeah.
So they could call the finance department then and ask for a true up on what's costing so much that they may not have realized, correct?
Exactly, and we have an open door policy. If you have any questions and you want to find out why a charge is here or why a benefit cost is what it is, just give us a call and we'll answer you.
Okay, or a council person could do that if they see a big hike, and normally there has not been such a high increase in the interfund charges. Then they could also find out what seems to be becoming a big expense in that department. Then.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Councillor Servadius.
So, Mr. Goldman, trying to get a handle on this, tell me if this is a correct statement, and hopefully audio is okay. I don't know how close to be to this thing. So I've been referencing the printed packet that we have, and I was looking at page 44 when we talk about the general fund having an ending fund balance in 2019 of 2.3 million and then ending up at 26,000 for the end of 2022. If I was to apply that same logic at the screen that you were sharing and that's in our current packet, at the end of 2019, we have an unreserved fund balance, and I'm going to round, of 4.1 million. And then we have a proposed unreserved fund balance at the end of 2022 of 1.9 million. Either way, whether it's based on this page, the printed page is what I'm pointing at, or the digital page that's in our current package, we're using about 2.2 million of cash, extra cash, whatever we want to call it. I'm not going to call it reserves because we have reserves, but let's call it unreserved fund balance that we're using up, $2.2 million. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's a correct statement. That's what's in the budget. Yep.
So if we did that the following biennium, 23-24, unless we don't know, and I know that's maybe a long ways to project out, we would have zero. If the same trends held, we would have essentially zero unreserved fund balance. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that is a correct statement.
Okay, so I just think that's something that we need to take a hard look at if that's what we really want to do right now. That makes me very nervous to go through that much cash. Thank you.
Any other questions, council? Okay, we'll move on to street fund.
Mayor, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure again that we're all on the same page as we move forward here. Unreserved fund balance is basically a fund that's been rolling over. It's not our reserves. It's a fund that's been rolling over, and it's built up over a period of time due to, I'm assuming, corrections, mid-year corrections or end-year corrections, like this year would be a perfect example that our true up, I guess would be the best term to use, is going to true us up about $1 million in our budget, and that ends up rolling into unreserved fund balances if we're not projecting and spending it in advance. What I'd like to maybe see, and I don't know that it's a document you can provide to us today, but if you could get it to us, I'd like to see how that unreserved fund balance grew and how we ended up at our $4.1 million. I'd like to see some history of that unreserved fund balance. I'd like to get an idea of how many years we've been working on building this unreserved fund balance. Again, these are not reserves. These are not our this is not our emergency fund. This is our unbudgeted item fund. This is our been tucking it away for a rainy day or for a big project or something fund, knowing that it's not our job to hold on to public funds. It's our job to make sure public funds are best put to use. At the same time, to have the stabilization of the reserve funds, of those emergency funds set aside, which is not what we're talking about. We're talking about general budget funds that have built up these unreserved fund balance. So I think it's going to be important for us to understand that and maybe even see some history before. I mean, I imagine there's been some times where that balance has been low. I'd like to kind of maybe see how is it built up? Is it an up-down cycle that we should expect to see, or has this balance remained at a certain amount for a long period of time and we're dipping below what's been dipped into in the past? Those are all, I think, important trends for us to understand.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We can go back in time and break it down like this, going back a few years, no problem.
And and if we have any major true ups in there, in other words, if we have any major ups where we see a year where that unreserved fund balance grew dramatically, any history that you could provide us, I think would assist us there. If there's a cause for that, if we had a particular year where we had $1.5 million go into the unreserved fund balance, I'd sure like to know why we saw that happen, right? But that history, I think, will help us understand this particular fund balance a little better.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on then at this time to the street fund.
Absolutely. Let me just share this again. Where's the meeting? Okay, share. Where's the street fund? Share it. I'll give it a few seconds so it could come up on everybody's screen. So the street fund, the beginning fund balance is 2.7 per the ending fund balance of the 18 CAFR. We have revenues of 1.3. We have expenses of 2.1. You'll see this interfund charge here in 19 kind of drove those expenses, and also these transfers out for capital projects drove those expenses as well. So we're looking at a use of this is an actual, so $733,000 was used in 19, and that brought the ending fund balance down to 1.96. We have about $500 in the expendable restricted. We have a reserve operating policy at 344 for a total unreserved fund balance of 1.6 million. So we bring this 1.79 up to here. We have the 20 amended budget. We have the revenues, we have the expenses, and then we have the difference, and this drops down by 457. We have our operating policy at 281, and we have the unreserved going down to 1.2. for the budget, now our projections show it actually a little bit lower than the budget just because the gas and the motor vehicle fuel taxes and the CARPON revenues are lower just because this particular year, the revenues collected from those were lower because of most likely COVID. Personnel expenditures are slightly lower, operating and maintenance is slightly higher, holding everything else the same. We're looking at $550,000. This goes to 1.4, gets brought up here. And we have the revenues again. Hopefully the gas taxes and the CARPON funds will start to come back. We have personnel expenditures, interfund transfers. These were budgeted just based on past practice. These were budgeted based on the latest trued up numbers that we had, which were 19s. And just like when the current biennial, the 1920 biennial was put together, the latest trued up numbers that they had was 17s. So they used 17s for these two budgets for at least the interfund allocations that come out of finance. So that's what we put here. But what we're going to do is work with all the departments early next year when we do our year-end closing process. And as part of the year-end closing process will be the true up for 20. And based on what we find, we may come back to the council to revise these interfund charges throughout, all the funds, not just the streets fund. But yeah, once you subtract revenues and expenses, you're looking at using 463, bringing fund balance to 950, and you do the same process again for 22, and it looks fund balance goes down again by 400,000. That brings it to 572. Breaking it down, obviously we're not going to know this until we do the year end for that particular year. We have the operating policy, which is basically 2 months, and the unreserved fund balance is $300,000 at the end of 22, based on budget. Are there any questions on the street fund?
Councilor Servadius.
One is semantics. I don't know, Mr. Goldman, is there any way for you to increase your cursor size? It's very hard in council chambers. And or Mr. Oborn, can we dim that far bank of lights? My eyes are not what they used to be. I think it might help.
Pointer,
It's hard.
option, arrow. Ooh, ink color? I can make it red maybe. No, that's terrible.
That's much better. That's much better.
Is
And
that
I don't
good?
know if you can or not,
You
Mr.
like the
Goldman
red?
will just help us in here.
I know it's small, but not sure what else to do.
Okay. So a couple questions I had here. Once again, if I'm using the current slide that we're looking at on the screen, the red dot helps. That helps a lot.
Thank you.
I'm doing some rough math in my head, but it's once again about 1.3 million that we're taking and I appreciate what Mr. Wiesner, I'm conflating my neighbor. What he was in my previous dentist too. So I was just looking at about 1.3 million here that we're using up over this biennium. And if we have large capital outlays or something that explains that, it's going to sit a little bit better with me. And if you know these answers now, that's great. If not, if you could provide them to council. But when I see us go through that much of, once again, carryover balance, rainy day fund, slush fund, I understand now what I'm looking at on your digital slide up here. But still, that's my first statement is there's 1.3-ish million that gets used up there. Are we, and this, I remember in Ms. Boyer's presentation on 1028, this is something I keyed in on, and so I went and talked to Ms. Rose and Mr. Bridges over in Public Works. We have our annual streets improvement going from 400,000 down to 30,000 per year. Is that reflected on this slide that we're looking at? That was a statement that was made that I see in our binder, but.
Oh, yeah, I'd have to ask, we could definitely look into that, but Jessica would definitely have a good pulse on the capital expenditures.
Is Ms.
David, if you
Rosen?
don't mind, I can answer that question.
Thank you, Jessica.
So yes, that is reflected as a $30,000 in the transfers out portion. I believe the original request for the annual street improvements was 500,000, but we decreased that to 200,000, where 30,000 is coming out of the streets operations fund, and the remaining 170,000 is split between REIT 1 and 2. So that is shown here. The 30,000 is included as part of the transfers out to the streets capital projects fund.
So the way I read it, and maybe I heard Ms. Boyer was that it was stated that we were reducing the annual streets improvement, I don't know if that was a capital improvement fund, from 400 down to 30,000, 400,000 to 30,000?
Yes, we reduced the streets funding for that project. It was initially 400,000 to come from the streets operations fund, and the remaining 100 to be split to REIT 1 and 2 for the $500,000 original cost for the annual street improvement capital project. But due to the fact that the streets operations fund was unable to contribute the full 400,000, we decreased the funding from the streets fund down to 30,000. The overall project is now being funded at 200,000 as opposed to the 500,000. So $30,000 will be coming from streets operations, and the remaining 170,000 is coming from REIT 1 and 2 for the $200,000 cost of that project.
And so if I heard you correctly, we're going from 500,000 that we wanted to do down to 200,000 for multiple projects or a project?
I believe, and someone from Public Works can chime in, but this annual street improvements is considered as one capital item on our capital project, but they do have an internal list over at engineering to show exactly what this project and what streets will be included as part of this annual street improvement overlay project.
So if this is Jim, if I can answer that, our plan is to focus on Whidbey Avenue from SR 20 to Oak Harbor, and then from that intersection of Oak Harbor and Whidbey south down to 3rd. So that is the project that we've identified for the funding for this year.
And so either maybe Mr. Bridges, or I'm not sure who, is this separate then from the TBD projects and funding?
Yes, this is totally separate.
This is more in the arterials realm, or this is just truly a separate project or separate category?
This is a separate category. So there's TBD, there's streets capital, and there's arterials. So TBD will focus on the residential roads. Streets capital will focus on any type of road, and arterial is the fund that's typically set aside for the use of the federal funds or STIP funds.
Thank you. That helps get those three buckets squared away again in my head. Thank you. And then I guess, is there anything in here then that the TBD would pay for or could pay for in the streets fund? Or is that need to be held totally separately?
Was that question for me, Mr. Sebadius?
I guess, or Mr. Goldman, I don't know who wants to.
Or Jessica would probably be.
Well, I'll give you my opinion first. So based upon the research I've done, any work that is done on any road, whether it's a federally functional classified road such as arterial, collector, minor arterial, or residential, or even an alleyway, TBD funds can be used to pay for that those costs.
This is Jessica, and I would like to chime into that. I know we've had several internal meetings as we decrease this project down to 200,000. There is conversation going around to see whether or not the arterials fund, which does not have any operating expenses, could contribute the additional 300,000 to this project to bump it back up to the original ask of 500,000. So we're still determining the feasibility of that.
All right, thank you. I just want to make sure, this is very important, the infrastructure. While it's difficult for even myself to keep it separate, the three buckets, I know the public looks at it. We voted for this increase in the sales tax, and they're going to want to see streets being paved. And so I just want to make sure that we're not backing off on that promise. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, as I'm looking at all these funds, if we're using significant unreserved fund balance, that there's a reason, a very definite reason for that, specifically large one-time capital projects. If it's for any kind of operations and maintenance or an ongoing cost, that's very concerning and not sustainable. Thank you.
Councillor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. David, could you explain to me the interfund charges in that street fund? 2019 at 775. Looks like 531 in 2020. Then we're back up to 771 in 2021, and 772 in 2022?
Sure. In 19, we did a true up at the beginning of 20, after 19 closed. And when things were run through the cost allocation model, it came up to 775. Now for 20, the budget is 531. There's different items that go into the interfund charges. One of the items is from from the general fund, which finance works on, and there's other charges that would come out of the internal service funds, like the IT fund or the vehicle reserve for replacement sinking fund, or just the vehicle maintenance fund and so on. So that's why we do a true up, to find out what the true numbers are when the year closes as part of a year-end closing process. The numbers in 20 are budgeted numbers, and this budget was put together in 2018. So that's what this number comes from. This budgeted number was lower in 19, but due to the use of services from the general fund, or maybe some uses of services from the internal service funds, it ended up being over budget in this particular line. For 20, well, we just kept it the same here in the projected column as the budget, because we haven't done the year-end process for 20 yet, because 20 is not closed. For 21 and 22, the practice in the past has been to look at the last trued up information that we have regarding these cost allocations and put that in the biennial budget. So the last trued up information that we have is the 19 true up. So, and there's some other changes to various interfund charges as well. That's why it's not the exact number of 19, but that's the number that we ended up using for the budget for 21 and 22. The same thing was done when the current biennial was put together. When the 19 and 20 biennial was put together, the last trued up information that they had was the year 17 true up, which is why those numbers ended up being in the budget. That's why the numbers look like they do. Now, what we're going to do, early next year when we do our year-end process, is we're going to take a look at this, true up the numbers for 20, and then take a look at these budgeted numbers for 21 and 22, and come back to the council if needed for a budget amendment to kind of put these numbers more in line of what we think they're going to actually look like for 21 and 22. But right now, the best information that we have are the trued up numbers for 19.
So we could be facing a $240,000 charge on 2020 that we don't have budgeted right now in this fund?
Like I said, we have to do the year-end process and see how it looks. There's a potential for that. There's a potential for it to even be lower. You really don't know until all the departments gather the information that they need, for the driving factors that are in the model, and it goes in the model and it spits out a calculation.
Well, I got to tell you, this is one of the areas I have the biggest concern in the budget on, and it is in this area. I mean, we have an amended 2020 and a projected 2020 budget of 1.7 million for streets. We're going into 21, 22 with a fairly similar budget of 1.64 and 1.62, and obviously the glaring thing that sticks off the page is the change in transfers out and the change in interfund charges, right? And transfers out mean, street projects. And we were all very specific when taking on the TBD that we would not remove funds from our streets budget in lieu of TBD, that the TBD would be additional funds to street overlay projects moving forward. They were going to get our city caught up, get our infrastructure in good shape. And the reality is, what I'm hearing here is that's exactly what's happening. They were pulling money out of the projects, the standard street fund, because it's not there, right? And that can't happen. I mean, it was something we discussed. We all discussed as a council. We discussed it with the city administration. It was the message we sent out to our constituents. So somebody's going to have to convince me that the same amount of work is going to be done on the streets that was going to be done before, along with the additional TBD funds coming in. because that's the commitment we made to our citizens. So maybe you can address that. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Yeah, I have nothing to add based on what I said before. It's just based on a formula. The driving factors go in and it's done, after the year closes. So we have complete information and it just, it spits out numbers for every fund. That's the past practice here.
Yeah, so certainly I'm gonna want to see some more information about that inter-fund charge if you can get it over my way. We're moving forward. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Servadius?
Mr. Goldman, that just made me think of something. So the interfund charges, is that, you had sent us an email regarding the indirect cost allocations and how that's computed. Are those costs factored in here in the interfund charges?
Yes.
Are we going to get a detailed explanation or a more thorough explanation that can be emailed out to council, or a breakdown of how that works and why?
Oh, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we can do that.
Any idea how long that might take?
Well, I don't think we've done it before, so we'll have to start working on it.
But it should be a spreadsheet, right, that's tracked and the data's entered and you can just forward that to us?
I think you guys were both talking.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Goldman. I mean, it's just a spreadsheet, right, that they enter the data into and the calculations come out and it's allocated accordingly, correct?
Yeah, but it's a spreadsheet with 20 tabs. So it goes through a lot of different areas. So, yeah.
Okay, well, to the best of your ability, please, I would look forward to an explanation.
Yeah.
I guess Mr. Wiesner made me think about this as well, that I'm, I want to make sure we're putting down some payment. Thank you.
Sure.
So before we go on to the Senior Services Fund, I think it would also be helpful to have available the next time we talk about this, the difference in the CAPRON and the decrease in the CAPRON funding. I think that would just be helpful. That's a direct COVID effect. Okay, let's move on then to Senior Services Fund.
Mayor, could I ask a quick question since you mentioned it?
Yes.
The CAPRON funds only go to islands. And with a change in the makeup of our legislatures, there's always been a fear that money could go away. So do we have a backup plan if that amount completely disappears? Like we may get half a year for 2021. That's been one of those funds we have seriously enjoyed because we just don't have any other money for our streets. And I agree with Mr. Wiesner that we said we would not take away funds from the street funds because we're so far behind, and TBD would be TBD projects and street funds would be streets. But if we lose the CAPRON, is there a plan other than just canceling? That should be something considered also. Yes, I know people aren't buying gas, so we're not getting the gas tax, but it was a fund made for islands that, you take a bridge or just ferries to in order to even out what happens in other cities. Thank you.
That's the very reason that I suggested we talk about it again. Thank you. So let's then move on to Senior Services Fund.
Okay, so the Senior Services Fund has a beginning fund balance of $213,000. In 19, it had, at the beginning of 19, there was $336,000 of revenues, about $450,000 of expenses. The change in fund balance was 113 to the negative, so the ending fund balance went down to about 100,000. The operating policy, which is a percentage of budget, is 75,000, so the unreserved fund balance is 25,000. And we have the amended budget, which actually was almost even. There was a slight loss of about $2,000 to the projected budget. You can see that revenues are down, but also expenses are down, and the net effect is an increase in fund balance of about $12,000. So that brings the total ending fund balance projected for 2020 at 112. We have reserves and we have the unreserved fund balance here. For 21 and 22, well, we'll start with the beginning fund balance of 112, which is the ending fund balance here. You have your projected revenues. We have the projected expenses. We're looking at using about $30,000 of fund balance, bringing it down to $82,000. This is how it's split. And then for 22, this number goes up here. You have your projected revenues, projected expenses, use of fund balance of 14,000. This is your total. When you do the calculation for the 2 months on operating, it's actually more than the amount of fund balance that you have. So your unreserved fund balance goes negative, which it can't. So it'll go to zero, and that amount will end up being taken out of your operating policy reserve for the end of for 2022. Are there any questions on the senior service fund?
Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. So looking at this one, the biggest thing that I see happening here, please correct me if I'm wrong, is we've got a roof going on. So that is part of the, is that part of the transfer in? But there's a capital outlay of 110, that's the roof. I'm just trying to figure out where the total revenue is coming from. The transfer in jumps up, not quite 110. So proposed in 2021, I'm on the screen that you're showing there. So proposed 2021, we've got transfers in of $310,094. Is that predominantly a transfer in
Yes,
from?
and how much is coming from REIT?
About 105,000 is going to be a transfer in for that capital outlay roof replacement.
And that's
So
coming in,
yes,
I'm
the
sorry,
100
from,
yeah, coming in from REIT 2, I believe, is as a transfer in.
okay. And this is one, and I'm starting to reconcile a little bit better. We have an extra column here, which is the projected 2020 column that we don't have in our binders. But going back to Mr. Wiesner's math, if we have an unreserved fund balance ending in 2021 of 13,000, we start a beginning fund balance in 22 of 81, we made $50,000. Is that just another projection?
That's total fund balance. You'll see that the $81,000 matches this ending fund balance. This is just the breakdown of that $81,000. So the $81,000 is broken down by the operating policy, which is 2 months of expenditures, and whatever's left over becomes unreserved fund balance.
Thank you.
So
That makes a lot
this
more
goes-
sense. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Are there any other questions?
Looks like Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. So the senior services is an enterprise fund, correct? They need to make their own money to spend money, like
No,
the
they're-
marina?
No.
They're not an enterprise fund. They're a governmental fund. They can be supported by the general fund.
Typically, about 1/3 of its revenue comes from the general fund.
Okay, so the transfer in, is that to make it $310,000? That's just raising it from the year before with money to do the capital project, and it's from a REIT fund?
Yeah, that's my understanding. The increase from 2020 to 2021 was to pay for this capital outlay project.
So we normally transfer in for their budget $200,000 each year, it looks like.
Yeah, it would seem so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's from the general fund.
Okay, I just remember Mike McIntyre arguing with the city over funding, that if they didn't make it, they didn't get to spend it. We also had a different finance director, which was Doug Merriman. I just don't remember that we were always transferring in that much funds for this, and to be frank, they haven't been open. I mean, we need to pay our employees, but they haven't been open. So I'm just surprised that it's so high.
Yes, and this is Liz Lane. Can I answer a few things here?
Yes. go
Sure,
ahead,
fine
Liz.
with me.
Thanks. Thanks. So yes, I just wanted to confirm a couple of things that we do receive and have for several years, even beyond the 3 that I've been here, transfers in from general fund revenue to support our budget. And it does go up and down depending on the year, depending on our, what our projected revenues and such are. And we were heading in a good direction of lowering the ask from the general fund while increasing our revenues in kind. And so I think maybe what Mike is saying too is, and as you can see here in our projected 2020, that when we don't have revenue coming in, then there's extra additional programming costs that then are cut. So we're not spending if we're not making things, which was why we're able to kind of shore up our finances this year when we didn't have in-person programming. And yes, I do want to confirm that while we don't have in-person programming, we aren't necessarily closed. We're still providing quite a few services for older adults in our community, which is definitely something that I'll be going over in my upcoming presentation on the 18th. So yes, we're closed for in-person programming, but we are not closed. We are open for business and serving the community.
Okay, it just seems still a little confusing. Part of the rationale for a while getting the bus, which we've now sold, was to make money because he needed a new HVAC system and this and that. And we didn't have the money to pay for that. They didn't have the money to singers to pay for that. So they were trying, I mean, that's also when they started the passport photos and the service to take them to Seattle and bring them back. And it just seems like they've gone away. And whenever it's nice to have programs and it's necessary and it's a huge part of our population, I just, there are other departments with their programs that are very valid too. So I'm just trying to balance it across the board. That's all I'm trying to do.
Understandable. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on the Senior Service Fund?
Doesn't look like it. I think we're okay now. on that.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, this is an overview of the budget amendments that occurred after the budget was adopted for 19 and 20, the current biennial. So in 19, there were about, looks like 3 budget amendments. First one was for fire truck repairs in the amount of $167,112, and money was taken out of the stability fund for that, and then a little bit more was added in the next budget amendment, about $17,000 more, and about $61,000 was added as well with that budget amendment for the utility office remodel. The source of funds for that were the utility funds. The next budget amendment used Sleeper Road proceeds for the Harbor Heights land purchase and the Portland Loos, and the total budget amendments for the general fund for 19 were $600,000. For 2020 budget amendments, there were 2 budget amendments. One was the mid-biennial budget amendment. That was to account for positive year-end results, which meant that expenses came in under budget and revenues came in over budget. And we also received about $711,000 for CARES, from the CARES Act for small business grants, for a total amendment for the general fund of $1.4 million, and the total for the biennial was about $2 million. Are there any questions on this slide? All right.
Doesn't look like it.
Hearing none. Proposed reductions. So a city administrator sent out a communication to all the department directors about 2 weeks ago, asking them to find reductions in their budgets that were submitted for 21 and 22 to the amount of about 2% of their budgets. And these are the reductions that were found. About 6,600 in city council, about 15,000 or so over the 2 years for judicial, 2,000 for the mayor. Administration, we're looking at about 22,000. HR was about 13,000. Finance was about 45,000. Law was 24. Development services was about 47. General government was about 47 and a half. Police, they looked at 5 different lines. Overtime, 56. Professional services, 64. Software contributions, 22. Equipment, about 50, and operating expenses, it looks like about 15. And fire, it looks like found about, what is that, about about 100,000 or so in reductions, and parks found about 40, 50, about $60,000 worth of reductions. So the total over 2 years was about $611,000.
So
Are there any
just-
questions on these reductions?
Yeah, just let me add a little bit to that, David. Yeah, the staff, department heads will be prepared on the 18th to talk about it, and most people integrated those descriptions of those cut and more detail on it in their presentations on the 18th. So we'll come back and give you more detail on that.
All right.
Counselor Servadius.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman, could you back up, please? I just want to make sure, once again, in my head, that I've got this straight. A couple of slides, slide 11. It was the summary. There you go. So we had an increase of 600,000, I'm rounding, of money going out, but then 1.4 million of money coming in.
Oh, no, this is actually an increase to fund balance. This was the budgeted increase to fund balance because our expenses came in below budget and our revenues came in above budget. So together that we estimated at the time the budget amendment was done in December that the fund balance would increase by about $689,000.
Okay, so that, and then the next line item, the 711, that was the CARES grant.
That's the CARES grant. That's also an increase. Yep.
And so if we add those up, the 598,360, just above that,
Yes. This.
plus the 1.4, so that's just the total amount of money that's not a plus or minus, I'm
Oh,
rounding.
yeah. You're right. Yeah, this is an increase to fund balance. This is new revenues, and these are expenses, but this is how the expenses were funded. So you're right. This is just a total amount for the, that number represents the total appropriation amount that the council approved to spend. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't have revenue sources to cover those expenses. So,
May
yeah,
I,
you're right.
may I speak on that, David?
Sure, Taylor.
Sure. So when we do a budget amendment, we increase both revenues and expenditures. We bring to council the expenditure and the revenue source. So each of these budget amendments hit both revenue and expenditures. They were an increase over what was approved by council. So council approved a budget in 2019 that was $600,000 less than the amended budget at the end of the year. In 2020, the budget is $1,400,000 more than the budget that council approved. That's why you'll hear us refer to it as the amended budget. Thank you.
All right, I'll come see you on that one. Now, if we could go forward 2 slides, please, I think it was. Or I guess, on council, can we get a copy of our budget? In my 8 years, we're always assigned a number, but we never discuss it. I mean, we've talked about travel, but whatever we contribute to technology, I don't even know what comprises our budget. Probably a contribution to the technology fund for our iPads and software, and then travel. I don't know what else comprises our budget. So if you could email us a copy of our budget so we could discuss it.
I believe we did when we emailed out, I think it was a couple days ago, when we emailed out this presentation, we also emailed out the line item breakdown of all the departmental budgets. And I believe that included city council.
It's on 48 in David's presentation. It's the extra in the council packet we did for today. It's page 48.
All right, I'll go find that. Thank you. And then I'm excited, utilities, you showed a reduction that they're hoping for $20,000 each year for the use of reclaimed water. I'm very excited about that purple, I'm assuming that's purple pipe, and they're thinking, I don't know if there's anyone, our new parks director, if he's in here, to think that that's realistic to have that up and rolling in 21 and 22?
They'll be talking about that like I talked about on the 18th.
Okay.
So if there's somebody here, we can jump ahead. Jim or Kathy, can you speak to that now?
On the water reuse program, or reuse issue, yes.
Yeah.
So when the plant was designed and constructed, along with Windjammer Park, all the infrastructure was installed in the park, and of course the system has the clean water facility has a reuse water system within it. All that's left to do is to install a tank and a pump to pump the reuse water from the plant into the Windjammer Park system. So yes, it's very realistic that this should be able to be completed.
Thank you.
Also, the annual cost for irrigation has been about $34,000. So we took a conservative number of $20,000 in savings because the wastewater plant can't just give that water because there's going to be pumping costs and they need to recoup the cost of the capital project. So we're leaving about 14,000 or so for those costs.
Councillor Goebel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I have a question in regards to the Main Street donation. And I wasn't sure where to find it in previous budgets, but my first question is, how much do we normally donate to that group? If anyone can answer that.
It's the amount there, that's the net.
That is.
That's the amount that we end up, we do a larger amount. That's 25% of the total they get, and we get 75% of it back from the state. So we don't count the amount we get back the next year from the state with the B&O rebate or refund. So that's the net amount it costs us is the 20 annually. It's right there in that number.
Right.
2370.
Yeah, 2370 is our net after our grant, after our rebate from the B&O tax that we pay out to them, so.
And so if they don't receive that amount, do they know that they potentially will not be receiving that amount from the city?
Well, they did their presentation. I think one of the questions I had is I know
Right.
they didn't have a director.
Right.
In order to have a director, they need to, in order to be B&O eligible, they need to keep their Main Street status. So he did answer the question. I was going to ask if Dan did a good job of answering the question that they would continue to, and they were going to go ahead and get a full-time director so they qualify and continue to go ahead
Right.
and qualify for the B&O because, if we didn't get the B&O, then it's four times that amount is what we would end up paying. I think it's total about 130 on the top of my head. Does that sound right, Tally? If you can look at it.
Tally's looking it up as we speak. I'll be back in one
Okay,
moment.
we'll get you back the total number.
Yeah.
This is the net amount that we end up out of pocket for us. So we're able to leverage the money quite heavily, and we went to the maximum amount in the last budget cycle. They asked us to increase it, and we did. I'm not telling you to do it, I'm just giving you areas to do it, and I'll get in more detail in the general services if you wanted to go through departments.
Yeah.
Your council can certainly pick and choose.
Yeah.
These are ones that if you wanted it, we're giving you kind of things that you can grab, but you certainly can do that. It would really make it difficult, and they couldn't turn around and continue to operate without it because we're pretty much the
Right.
primary funding on it. They do
Right.
get a few other businesses that do the B&O contribution, but the bulk of it
you guys.
is the city.
Right. Yeah, that's why I was curious if we did cut some of their funding, would it be a huge detriment to that association and how they would kind of continue?
It would be a
Yeah.
loss of over 130 because we're getting leverage on it. So we wouldn't,
Right.
whatever we cut, it lowers the leverage we get with the matching funds that
Okay.
we get. So, because we write them a check for, she'll look it up, about 130, and then we get, like I said, we get a part of it, 75% of it back the next year in the lag. But we are the primary funder. We probably are 70 to 90% of their funding comes from
Right.
the city,
Yeah.
and then they get a little bit of funds from additional businesses, and then they run events and but they probably usually only break even on events.
Right. Okay, thank you. I look forward to learning more about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm looking and I see that we gave them $95,000 in 2019. I can confirm $60,000 in 2020. I am looking to see if we made a second donation to them, but I can guarantee that we made $60,000.
Yeah, I think.
And
there
I
was-
will
Yeah,
research the other one.
I think there was 2 donations made, yeah.
Councillor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't realize that Main Street, what did you say, 70 to 90% of their funding? I didn't realize that that was such a huge percentage. And so I'm curious about their appeal of our decision to uphold the hearing examiner's ruling in terms of the residential development. So are they using our money to sue us? If most of their money is from us, how does that work?
I wish you would have asked that question when we had them at the meeting, at the last, that's part of the reason why we brought them in as part of the budget process, to allow you to do it. We certainly can ask them to come back and ask them that question. I know it's
I
been.
just figured they were
my guess is
using
that-
other funds, but I didn't realize we were so much of what they had.
Informally, my understanding informally is that they're saying that they're not using our funds, or using other funds that they have for the
That was
lawsuit.
my assumption.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you. So I'm looking, and this might help you, Ms. Goebel, page 58 will give you, or it starts into the options, yeah, on page 58. And that was one of the things you were asking about, was about halfway down on page 58, some of the general governmental funds. So in here, at the top of this, on page 58, it says options not included in the budget, and it references the Main Street donation. You get the slide that Mr. Goldman just had up here.
Oh, this one.
If it's a proposed budget reduction, yet I'm looking at a page that says it's not in the budget.
Yeah, these reductions are not in the budget. These reductions were gathered by the various departments over the last week and a half and provided to the city administrator, and we put it together here on this slide for you to take a look at and review.
So I was reading
So,
parentheses as a negative, but if it's not in the budget, you're saying we'd actually have 23,750 more in the,
no, it's in the budget. That would be pulling it out.
Oh,
The mayor's budget
This is a
funds
different
Main
section.
Street.
Yeah, we're going to get to this next. If this is what you're referring to.
It's on both
Yeah.
sheets, that minus, that would be pulling it out. So that would be an option of not funding Main Street. The mayor's
Okay.
budget has Main Street funded.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions then at this point? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Okay, moving on to the proposed options. These are administration options that are not in the budget that could be added to the budget. The first slide is for the administration department. It involves an economic development specialist. This amount is for the salaries. This amount here is for the benefits, and this is for equipment for the proposed position. The total option for this, the total cost of this position is about $100,000. Any questions on this? Okay, moving on to the next slide.
Councillor Servadius.
Oh,
So
sorry.
if we magically said, yes, we want all of those, we need to now go find whatever that is, 1.3 million over the next 2 years from somewhere else?
Yeah, we would have to find revenue, we'd have to find the money to pay for these options that are not in the budget. And this particular option would be $100,000. The total, let's see, the total for the general fund would be $454,000 the first year and $375,000 the second year, for a total of about $825,000, $830,000 for the general fund.
So if there's something we really like here, we just need to know there's something else that's got to give, correct?
Yes. Councillor Goebel.
Thank you, Mayor. I was curious, what is our current economic development strategy right now with the city? What do we do currently to develop that, the economy here locally?
I'd be happy to speak to that. Good question. It's kind of, the responsibility is kind of divided between the city administrator, the Developmental Services with David Cool. We had a position there in the past that was a split position. Ethan Spoon, I think people remember him. And one of the planners was a long-term planner and did economic development. And then for a while, we had a full-time person that was its own department that was an economic development specialist for a while, that had an office right over here where you used to say when you first came here, I used to have the economic development up on it. So we've done various things, but really it's just, right now it's just between the three, with me, with David Cool, and with our PIO, Sabrina Combs. So a lot of her PIO stuff crosses over into economic development. And the recovery program that we've been actively doing as part of economic development, using the CARES Fund and the business relief, is certainly an economic development. And then also we have an interesting process that we'll talk about in the project here with the when you individual projects, was the expansion of the marina. And if we become a more full service marina, that brings more prosperity and more jobs into the area. So we view that as a economic development project. We do have economic development projects kind of in the issue with Goldie Road and the expansion of utilities there. And that's another economic development. So it's a lot of components we're putting together here. The idea of having a full-time, a number of cities have a full-time economic development director or specialist, and that person can focus on it a lot more, kind of be an ombudsman and kind of an advocate for groups coming in. Right now, they just kind of come in, they do the preliminary process, but we don't necessarily hold their hand quite as much as we had somebody who was an economic development specialist. So we looked at this last time in the biannual budget too, and just never could come out with the funds. We funded it at one time, but we turned around and stopped funding the position and moved the money to other places. And just really been having difficulty to bring that back again. I know this was the #1 goal of the council, was economic development, so certainly it's a major priority. We looked into it, and our kind of goal here is the $25,000. There is some economic development money in the administration budget, about $30,000 in there. And then doing an economic study in 2020, and then deciding whether we want to move forward with a position in 2022, a full-time position to do it. And there's just a lot of, took an economic development thing with MRSC the other day, and there's just a lot of aspects of how they do it and what constitutes economic development. And I certainly can provide some of that material in my department head report and kind of go over that detail a little bit, but it's a variety of things. We do have the County Economic Development Council of Island County, and they fund, the state and the county funds at EDCIC, is Economic Development of Island County. They do a lot, and they cross over and provide a lot of economic development opportunities. She meets with people that are in the city, businesses that are in the city. She has a business that's looking to locate here. So there's a lot of efforts done there at the county, through the EDCIC, on economic development. So, and I now serve on the board there and trying to encourage her. And then we utilize some of the money that we have in the budget for professional services to help reimburse the EDCIC for some of the services they provide to Oak Harbor. And so one of the key things we did is we have the Opportunity Zone, which is a federal program. We were trying to encourage that development with that one. So it's one of the programs we've done. And then they provide they do a lot of outreach and meet with businesses, and EDCIC, and Sharon Zappington is their executive director.
Thank you. I look forward to learning about this.
Councillor Eisen.
Thank you. Just in addition to Mr. Oborn's response to Ms. Goebel, before I say that, I would like to see the information from the MRSC, because my first question is, okay, if we make this investment, what would the payoff be? So I'm sure that there are other cities that have crunched those numbers, and I'd be interested to hear that. But on that note, just to kind of pile on, you mentioned the marina. I didn't write it down. The Arts Commission, public art has been directly tied to economic development. And so we do that. And then I think that's also one of the reasons why our partnership with Main Street and with the Chamber of Commerce is so important, because they do so much of the heavy economic lifting there. So yeah, if we can come up with the money, then we give it to the experts and then they make all the things happen.
Thank you, I left them
Yeah.
out. Yeah, actually, Main Street's all about revitalizing the downtown.
Well, and
Chamber-
LTAC for all the events.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
Chamber, so, yeah, a lot of those
mostly
efforts.
distribute money is what we
So,
do probably.
Yeah, I should have brought them up too,
It's
so
all
thank
good.
you for catching that.
It's all good.
Okay,
It's good to think about all the
yeah,
components of what that person they could.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So when we've got some chamber, we've been doing a lot of the recovery issue with the chamber and with the Main Street partnership. And so we've got some more meetings coming up on staff to see how we can do that more aggressively.
Counselor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm going to look at it from a little different perspective. And, that's the thing about, the fact that we're all digging into this budget, right? And we're just not rubber stamping this through. We're all taking this very seriously. And from that, thoughts come out and thoughts may be developed that make sense and thoughts may develop that don't make sense. But, Blaine said something in there, and talked about all these different avenues that we're doing economic development in. And I often find that, when we split ourselves too many different ways and split ourselves thinly, we've got, $30,000 going this way. We got $10,000 going this way. We got money coming out of, 2% funds. We've kind of got a lot of different money related to economic development going in a lot of different directions. And, maybe that money is being very well spent, and maybe by spreading it out thinly like that, we're getting more bang for our buck. But I guess I got to question the other side of that. What if we're not? It'd be interesting to see what money we have going out, for economic development related items presently, and where that money's going. Maybe it's a small amount of money. Like I say, maybe we're getting a ton of bang for that buck. And maybe once we total that all up, we may all look at that and go, whoa, a whole lot. That's a whole lot of money. And we'd be doing better off if we centralized that function. So I guess that would be a question. I mean, we start looking and we're talking about that our planning department spending time on economic development. We've got our city administrator spending time on economic development. We've got other staff members spending time on economic development. And then we have all these other individual organizations spending time on economic development. It just seems like maybe if that was centralized function, maybe possibly, maybe I'm all wet, but maybe possibly it might pencil out to getting the position filled. I don't know. So something, again, I guess something I'd like to see from you, Mr. Goldman, an idea of the money we currently have in the budget that's going out for economic development efforts, and maybe Mr. Oberon can help you with some of that.
Thank you, Counselor Wiesner. Anyone else? Okay, then we'll keep moving. Back to Dave.
All right. So that's the administration option. The next slide is the development services option. They're looking for new permitting software. They're estimating it will cost around $100,000. They can certainly go over that in further detail next week about what types of software systems that are out there and what the new permitting software will do to improve our processes over what we currently do now. Are there any questions on this slide? All right, hearing none, general governmental options. So we're looking at a reduction to the Main Street donation that we discussed earlier, and an additional contribution to the Homeless Coalition. And there's something that's cut off. Budget includes 9,000. Tally, do you know what that is?
Yes, I do. The budget includes $9,000 for our Haven donation, and this is just an additional $11,000 to bring it to $20,000 per year.
Okay, thank you. So
Yeah,
with the
David,
reduction
can
to the Main Street donation and with the addition of that, it actually is a reduction to the budget overall of $12,750 each year. Are there any questions on this slide?
All right, David, can I add a little bit more detail? So we already have the
Go ahead.
$23,750 for the Main Street in the mayor's budget, and we also have $9,000 in the mayor's budget. Former council member Larson had a goal of raising it to $40,000. But certainly that has to come out of somewhere, or else we have to figure out how to pay for it. So I just wanted to keep that on the table, so I put in a option of just, I cut it down, an option of just going to 11,000, but certainly you guys can put any number in there the majority of council wants to put in there. You do nothing, we'll continue to provide the $9,000 per year to the Homeless Coalition. All right, thank you, David.
All right, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, fire department options. So there's 3 options for equipment for vehicles. Looks like about 110,000 over 2 years for engine 812, another 110,000 or so for engine 81, and a Seagraves aerial for $230,000. This, of course, would be the cost of these engines is much more than the amounts that you're seeing now, but this would be putting money aside to the sinking fund or the reserve for replacement fund in order to purchase these in the future. That's my understanding of that. The fire chief can chime in if he has a different understanding or if my understanding is incorrect. Also, we're looking at adding $80,000 in 2021 for an extraction tool. Are there any questions on this?
Yeah, and the 80,000, we'll come back with a budget revision if he gets the grant funding. But we didn't put it in there because we weren't sure where we were going to get the grant funding, but we want to kind of put the note that there's a possibility that he'll get a grant funding, and then we'll just come back with a budget amendment for the 80,000 in revenue for grant, and then spending the extraction, buying the extraction tools for 80,000.
Councilor Servadius?
Chief Merrill, if you're on the call here, I know in Ms. Boyer's presentation, she referenced some fire department equipment purchases that weren't budgeted, but we would address them next year. I don't know if these are them. I do think, this is one of those challenging subjects that at some point we have to start putting some money away. Chief Merrill, if you're on the call, I think is the money that we just allocated is ladder 81. That's the ladder truck that we just had fixed, and we hope to get another 5 to 50 years out of it. Are you there, Chief Merrill?
Yeah, what this is, Mayor Pro Tem asked to look at what it's going to cost to put money aside every year in order to buy these vehicles when they come due. And you are correct that 111,000 is for the replacement of the ladder truck. We did get 5 to 7 to possibly 10 years of life out of it with the refurbishment. The city's process has always been to plan on bonding for these new vehicles when they come due. We've got 2 engines that are going to be coming due in the very near future. And then these 2 E1s, they're still a few years out, about 10 years out, and they're about $500,000, $600,000 a piece.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, no, it's one of those large capital purchases that we've got to gear up for, and I don't know if we can work it in now. I think it's worth discussion, and or, I don't know what that would look like as far as going out for a bond, how much that would take, but thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Any further questions on this slide? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor Heisen?
Go ahead.
I just thought of one, if Chief Merrill's still on the call. Is Oak Harbor's ladder truck still the only ladder truck on the island with the exception of the one that the Navy owns?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
All right. Parks options include the salaries and wages and benefits for a park specialist 1. It'll run about $64,500 to $65,000 per year. Are there any questions on this slide?
Yeah, Councilor Servadius has a question.
Thank you. It might help if we were able to, I'm assuming these are vacant positions that have been held open, or they're new positions they're requesting? Mr. Oborn's nodding yes. New position.
This would be a new position, an additional position.
And so when I look at the addition, I know we contracted out with, I forget the name of the landscaping company for the revised or the new addition to Windjammer. Miss Rosen, I guess this falls underneath you. Make a case for what would this person be doing in addition to the contracting and the landscaping that we did?
So the contract we have is just for weeding of the planter areas at Windjammer. This position would bring us back up to 2010 staffing levels. So there's a lot of work and tasks that have had to be not done as frequently as they have been in the past. There is additional labor required for Windjammer. We're just getting a handle on that because the first year after Windjammer opened, excuse me, the contract with Hoffman required them to maintain it for a year. So we're still getting a handle on that. We're going to have the 70, phase one of the 75 acres. We will need to start keeping that property somewhat maintained and open so that we don't incur encampments in there like we have in the past. There's a lot of work that needs to be done that hasn't been done over the years since 2010.
Thank you.
We're just trying to get back to where we were.
Okay, Dave, back to you.
All right.
Oh, Mayor Severance, this is Erica Wassinger. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Oh no, I've been here. I'm listening. I'm out of town.
Okay.
But I've been on the call the whole time.
I'm sorry.
But I had a question for Kathy and the parks part about the you mentioned Harbor Heights, the 70 some odd acres. What are you anticipating overall? What we're staffed at now, what we're going to need by the end of this budget cycle regarding the 70 acres and our current staffing? What are you projecting, towards as we get 2 years out from now? What are we going to need to maintain that park, and where you think it'll be at 2 years from now? That's my question. Thank you.
So the plan is, and we have a time limit on that recreation grant we received, the $300,000. So the plan is to build a few soccer fields out there. So we're going to have to maintain that. I don't believe that in this next biennium, we're going to need any more than the one person we're asking for. It's when we get into the future phases and we have significantly more athletic fields that we're going to need additional staffing.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to know what you were thinking 2 years out from now towards the end of this coming budget cycle. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wassinger. Back to Dave.
Okay, thank you. So the total for the general fund options that we just went through in 2021 is about 450,000. In 2022, it's 365,000 for a total of 825,000 or 830,000 over the 2-year biennium for the general fund. All right, moving on to the next slide. This is for the streets fund. A Lee Boy 5300 paver. The option would be to buy the paver for $120,000 in 2021. And my understanding is this would be a slightly used paver, which would save money over getting a new paver. But Kathy could certainly weigh in further on that particular, those details.
Councillor Servadius.
That was something when I was inquiring that came up, asking Ms. Rosen and Mr. Bridges about the street project when I went in there and met with them. And I think it would be good, I don't know who, Mr. Bridges, Ms. Rosen, if you'd like to elaborate. I was intrigued when you mentioned this. I don't know why we don't buy it right now and get on with it, but I guess if you have budget to do that, I don't know. Obviously, we're not in the paving season, but to me, this seemed like something that I would absolutely support just based on the brief discussion we had. Mr. Bridges, can you share, or Ms. Rosen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the purchase of the paver would obviously allow our street crew to do larger street repairs ahead of future TBD projects, and that was our goal. the only other option would be to contract out those larger street repairs. And keep in mind that under our current stormwater permit, that if we do any repair over 2,000 square feet on a road, then that road is now going to be a stormwater project as well. So we're looking at a lot of street sections that are in that neighborhood of over 2,000 square feet, that if we can start repairing those ahead of time, that would save us cost in our TBD from having to do stormwater improvements. So that's our goal, because once we get into stormwater improvements, then the money we have for TBD is going to go less for the street project and more for potential stormwater improvements. So we're looking at a used paver. We did some research on them, and you can find them from any price you want. Of course, the lower the price, the poorer quality the equipment's going to be, the higher the price, the better it's going to be. And this particular paver, we originally requested $220,000. That's a new paver. And we found pavers, with 200 hours on them for $105,000. Same paver, 200 hours, barely broke in. And so this request would be for a used paver. We certainly we still wouldn't be able to get the one for 200 hours because you have to factor in taxes and shipping costs to have this piece of equipment delivered. So.
Jim, did you want to go over some of the funding, the potential funding sources for this?
Yeah, so we're looking at how to allocate the cost of the paver across the utility funds as well. So you have the street projects that we know of, and then there are the water main repairs. I mean, a good example would be what just happened down on Bayshore. So we had to contract out to get that done. We've had 2 breaks in the last 2 weeks, unfortunately. And to get a paving contractor to come in there and do that work, that would come out of the water fund to pay for that. So we're looking at the water fund to pay for a portion of the paver. Obviously, same thing with sewer, same thing with storm drain. So we're trying to figure out the allocation of how each of those funds would help offset the cost or pay for the cost of the paver. So we have some existing funds that are unused in the equipment rental fund from an old piece of equipment that was called a Leighton box. And a Leighton box was a crude paving device that would fit on the back of a dump truck. And so the dump truck would dump the asphalt into the Leighton box. It would spread it like a normal paver, but then it has to disconnect and drive off and go get another load of pavement. Asphalt. So this is a freestanding piece of equipment like you see on the street. It's a smaller piece of equipment. It only paves up to 11 feet wide. And then we could actually line up dump trucks to just dump into the box and go from there, so without having to hook to it all the time. But yeah, so again, back to Mr. Goldman's question, we are looking at all the utilities potentially taking part in the purchase of this piece of equipment.
But some of the costs would still have to come out of either the streets fund and or that other fund you're talking. If we didn't have to do that dump truck or the other machine you were talking about, we can just use that fund.
Correct.
Okay, that's a potential too. But we can work it out, amongst ourselves.
Councilor Mack, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bridges, what kind of life expectancy you think you can get from this machine if we buy it pre-owned?
Oh, again, it depends on the hours that are on the piece of equipment. But these are, we're not doing industrial scale paving operations. So I would assume, in proper maintenance, this piece of equipment would probably last the city at least 20 years.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. An excellent question, Mr. Mack. It was one of the questions I was going to ask. And based upon that, I mean, seems a bit of a no-brainer. In fact, it seems to me as though this is a piece of equipment that's, been lacking from our inventory for a while. Is probably a little bit of the root of some of the reason our streets have gotten in the condition they have. Because, of course, as we all know, paving seasons are short in this neck of the woods. And if we're not thinking far ahead and even getting contractors in and getting equipment lined up, that can be an issue. And obviously, we don't necessarily get to control those times when our streets need digging up or repairs done. So, yeah, I think this is something that I would try to figure out a way to come up with budget money. And this is one of these deals. It's tough when we're going through this, right? Because at one time we're all saying we don't want to spend money, but the other time we can't cut off our nose to spite our face, and certainly cannot cut off the nose of our citizens to spite our face, and make decisions that obviously aren't going to be best for the long term. But I think this one makes long term sense. So I'd work with you guys certainly on figuring out how we can fund this thing. Thank you.
Well, and if I could also add just a couple other points. Currently the way we do patching in the city is all done by hand. We have our patch truck, which comes out with asphalt in it, and it's dumps, and it's labor intensive. It takes, everybody has to rake it out, shovel it into the right spots. And that's why we get bad patches. That's why we have Humpty Dumpty patches that aren't very smooth. Obviously a paver comes out, it's got a, flat screed on it. It paves a nice smooth section. It does require people to operate. I'm not trying to deny that, but as far as the actual physical labor, it's a lot easier on the human body than the current way we do it. So.
Thank you, Mayor. This question is probably for, not sure, Mr. Bridges or Mr. Goldman. Since this is part of the street operation, can this equipment be paid for out of the TBD funds, similar to materials used to pave streets?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it really depends on, what the machine is going to be used for. The cost will be allocated out based on the calls that'll come through. So if there's a water main break and then you have to fix the water main and then repave the street, the charges, the rental for the machine will go to the water fund. If it's just doing, a street repaving that has nothing to do with water or wastewater or sewer, then we'll have to figure out, if we're going to be charging, the arterial fund or the streets fund or the TBD fund. It really depends. It just depends on the type of project, that it relates to.
Yeah, and the TBD only funds the local road funds, so it'd only be for certain streets. The arterials would have to come out of the street fund. So there's kind of an allocation there. And then in our plan, we just budgeted the capital. We didn't budget the prep work, and that's part of the challenge that we're doing when we did to the voters. And the plan that the engineering did only had the contracting area out in the budget. So we want to make sure we follow the plan and the budget. So we're trying to balance that with and figure out how we can keep on accelerating and doing the repair out of the T fund, but yet have funds to do the prep work. That's an additional increase that we didn't have additional funding for.
But what about the piece of equipment itself? That is completely different.
A portion of it could be allocated,
Okay.
but that's not what we put in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
I got Mayor Pro Tem's been holding. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bridges, I believe we should have an employee then that could handle this machine and the operations already on staff?
Yes, it's this piece of equipment, again, this is not a big mainline paver. The big mainline pavers that you saw earlier this year on their streets, those usually have 2 or 3 people on the piece of equipment. But this piece of equipment requires one operator, and yes, we do have that experience on our current staff.
Okay, and obviously it would be cheaper than to hire out to have this done so it doesn't look like Humpty Dumpty. I like that.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't have the cost. We had reached out to Craig Construction to give us a ballpark on a 2,000 square foot road repair, which would be grinding it out and then paving it for us back. So I don't have that cost for us at this time. But hopefully, when we meet on the 18th, I'll have that number.
That would be wonderful. Would really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you. You just went down the path, Mr. Bridges, that I was wondering about. I think you said, unfortunately, we've used this twice, or we've had 2 repairs recently that we could have used this for. And so I was just curious if you had any idea how much of that is asphalt versus labor. I guess if we can save the asphalt is what it is, but if we could have saved the labor by having this machine and using our own staff, hopefully this thing would pay for itself in, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can, so the cost for the big bay shore repair was $37,000 roughly. And I would estimate that probably at least half of that would have gone back to the street repair portion of it. The other repair was a smaller repair, but still a 10 by 10 patch, and which this piece of equipment would have easily handled in one pass, and we'd have been done with it. So again, we are looking at all options to use this piece of equipment. You have it. Let's take advantage of it. It's a time saver for us. It's a money saver. I personally project if we had this piece of equipment, it would pay for itself within 2 years.
Mr. Olborn?
Yeah, this item is in the mayor's budget. We do have a sheet for it, for the Fund 101. It's number 28 in the allocation. But we pushed the funding because the funding was not there in 21 or 22 to 2023. So we have 2 options. We can do it as a capital and try to fund it in 2023, or try to come up with money sooner and buy a used one and come up with money sooner. So those are the 2 options, but I just want to call attention that it's there in the mayor's package. If you go to page 107, you can see it in the binder.
Okay. Then looks like we're probably ready to move on to water.
Okay, these are the water options. Would be to eliminate a vacant water specialist. That would save about $65,000 per year. Are there any questions?
Just a little history here. We did, in the last biennial, add a position in the budget to get back to where they were in the past. The person left, and then we have not refilled the position. So we do have the option of eliminating this position through attrition by just saving some money. So through the rate increase, there was requests for some cuts, and so I thought it fair to provide an option of a cut in the water fund with this position that was added. I directed them not to go ahead and continue with the recruitment of that position, so we have the option of cutting that position. So it's there. It is funded but not filled at this time, and this would take away the funding from it and do some savings to the water fund. And then I guess Kathy can go into more detail. So I think she asked for that position, and I think she needs it, but I just wanted to throw out an option there for possible cuts in the utilities.
So this position is really needed. Our regulations are constantly changing. However, Department of Health has created some new regulations and new requirements related to our cross-connection control program, which is a water quality issue. Our budget proposal includes reclassifying an existing employee to a water quality control specialist. We would not be adding any more people than what is currently budgeted, but by having all of these water quality issues that we have to address to maintain our operating permit through Department of Health, that means one less person out in the field. And our concern is that if we're not able to stay on top of all of these regulations, our operating permit could change. Right now we have a green operating permit. If we should miss something in the regulations, we're adding risk to the city, We also could lose our green operating permit and end up getting a yellow or a red operating permit, which means that we would be limited on the number of building permits, or if we could even issue any building permits. So we believe this position is extremely important to maintain so that we can stay in compliance with our regulations and reduce the risk to the city and continue to meet the commitments and requirements that we need to perform to meet the citizens' expectations and maintain a healthy and safe water system. I don't know if Jim wants to add anything to that, but we really strongly believe that this position needs to be filled and can't be eliminated, or there are certain things that just won't get done, and that increases our risk and the risk of an operating permit change.
Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Rosen, could you clarify? I mean, am I looking at 1 and 2 specialists or 2 number ones? I mean, I'm not. Can you clarify? Just are we vacating 2 positions or 1?
So we currently have a vacant position. Council authorized us to have a new position in this current budget. So several years ago, we had 8.33 full-time equivalent employees in the water division. Through efficiencies, technology, we were able to bring that down to 5.33 full-time employees. Then in 2019, in this current budget, 19 and 20, council authorized us to go to 6.33 FTEs. The 0.33 was Rich Tiehouse. He's since retired. We didn't fill that position, so we already have a savings of a 0.33 FTE. What this option that's being proposed in the mayor's preliminary budget is to not fill the current vacancy. So we would be back down to 5 FTEs. One other point I want to make is as the city grows and new developments come online, our infrastructure increases. And so there's more work to do. Regulations are constantly changing, requiring more effort. So that's why we asked for the position in 2019. That's why council approved it in 2019. And that's why we believe we need to fill this position moving forward. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Rosen, this would be a full-time position that would satisfy the health department requirements in order to keep our green permit?
Yes, it is. And it's not a new position. It's been in the 19 and 20 budget. And it's actually, the position is actually funded in the mayor's preliminary budget, but administration has put this option out here to not fill it as we move forward. And
right.
So we're asking you to consider not taking this option and just letting us continue on with 6 full-time employees.
Well, I guess I err on caution to not put us in jeopardy because we know how quickly unfunded mandates or requirements come in. That was part of the reason that we invested in this membrane and in a plant that would last 50 years, the in-works and the outside of the building. I would be worried too if we didn't keep the health department reliable. I mean, if we hadn't had a plan for the waste clean water facility, we would have had to have stopped any hookups to their sewer when the one downtown had its problems and had to be shut down. So I'd like to stay ahead and keep up with our permitting in the green. Thank you.
Councillor Servadius.
So, Ms. Rosen, you said this position is currently vacant. How long has it been vacant?
Since last spring.
And are we just attracting someone with the credentials or certifications?
I think with COVID and the changeover and the loss of Rich, everybody's just been trying to get their feet under them and get the organizational structure figured out. And we are now ready to move forward, and the restructure is part of the budget process. So that's why we haven't moved forward with filling it yet.
All right, thank you. I mean, I do agree. I guess if we have it in the budget now, and I appreciate Mayor, Mr. Oborn, this format. It's nice to be able to go through all of these. It's like an a la carte menu and really work through it and discuss it. So I appreciate this. It's in the budget now. I kind of concur with Ms. Munns that I don't think this stuff's going to get any less stringent. But so right now we would recognize the savings if we decided to cut it. But if we don't cut it, it just stays in the current budget. That's correct? All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councillor Heisen.
Mayor, I'm going to turn this over to you. And I'm curious as to, considering everything we just heard, what is the rationale for asking to eliminate this position in your proposed budget?
Thanks for the question. Actually, we asked staff to consider a number of options for council, and this is just yet another option. As Ms. Rosen mentioned, we haven't had anybody in that position for a time, and it's just another option to consider. So.
And I know, like I said before, as we went through the rate increase process, I think some of the council members did raise the issue if we can do some cuts in the utilities. So we're just bringing that through and cognizant of it, but certainly if you leave it in the budget, we'll go ahead and fill the position right away.
Okay, seeing no other questions then at this time, we'll move on to next item, engineering. Dave?
Yes, engineering options. So we're looking at a few positions here. The creation of a GIS technician locator for about $54,000 or $55,000 a year. The elimination of an administrative assistant, that's about $52,000 a year. A development review engineer for $90,000 a year. Of course, this is just salary. We'd have to add the benefits on the bottom rung as well. And a design engineering technician with a salary approximately of $75,000 a year. These are the associated benefits that go along with that. In addition, we're looking to get a truck for the GIS technician locator. Engineering can go into more details on the truck. And we also have some minor equipment for the GIS technician locator, for development review engineer, and for the design engineering technician. So the total for 2021 is about $2,000. The total for 2022 is about $290,000. Are there any questions on this slide? Or two slides?
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you. So this was also a topic that came up because I'd asked Ms. Bridges or Ms. Rosen and Mr. Bridges when I was sitting with them, specifically because their budget is large. How do we, what can we do? I'm always looking at ways to increase efficiency or save money. The same thing, really. It can be the same thing and improve morale. What do we need to do in any of those areas, or what ideas do you have? And there was something that came up then when Mr. Bridges was describing the GIS technician and what that person is able to do, and then coordinating with a in-house engineer, which I'm assuming is what the development review engineer is. And I was very intrigued. We've had this discussion for probably the last year plus or more. We talk about, do we have the person in-house and then we have the fringe costs of medical, et cetera, or do we outsource? Do we have them, do we contract out for these services? Is that more efficient and faster? I'm not convinced that outsourcing has been that much quicker, but I'd like to hear from staff. In the brief conversation we had that day, it seemed like, at least Mr. Bridges, Ms. Rosen, you guys were in support of this because you think there's a significant number of consulting fees that we pay that we could probably in-house. Is that correct? And would you share that with my peers if you haven't?
Yeah, so first of all, we're not asking for a development review engineer. So this slide is not correct. The development review engineer, we would like to go forward and continue to contract with John Simrau. He's doing a good job for us. And also, who knows whether the economy goes up or goes down. We don't have to worry about that person not having enough work and potentially laying it off. So I'll go to the first one, the GIS tech locator. That position, it would be funded out of the water fund, the sewer fund, and the stormwater fund to go out and do field locates when the calls come in, and they come in every day. That person would review the maps, go out and do the marking. That's why the person would require to have a truck, and it would be a small truck. They would also need, then when they weren't doing locates, which is only going to be about, probably at minimum half a day. So they locates at least half a day, and then they'll have time in the afternoon. Then they would be able to do the GIS locating services, where they would go out and locate the utilities, locate signs, locate features that need to be collected electronically and put into the GIS mapping system. So that's what the GIS locator would do, and that's how they would be paid for. We would like to take our current engineering technician and promote that person to the design engineering tech, and allow that person to focus solely on GIS, building the GIS map system, and getting us up and running with GIS. And then we would like to backfill that position with another engineering tech that would focus solely on in-house design engineering. And in the memo, I don't know if the council has got that yet, in the memo that went out, that position would save us about $1,850,000 in future consultant fees. If we can do design in-house with my current staff, and by hiring a dedicated engineering tech to perform those duties, we could save that much money. And that most of that money is budgeted out of the utility accounts. And so that savings would be reflected in the future rate increases.
So is that cost, the savings cost isn't anywhere in here? We're just looking at the cost of personnel plus benefits, salaries and benefits?
Correct.
So
Correct.
If we don't get through, I mean, that's a lot to swallow at the moment, but I would like to see that comparison a little more detailed, because when that came up in the discussion, I was very intrigued. Just to, the 30,000 foot view, look at the numbers. I'll spend, 70, 80, 100,000 to save 1.8 million. So I would like that, please, to be further developed. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bridges, we already own this GIS software, correct?
Yes.
And the person you would like to elevate up or move over, whatever, is already cross-trained, has been doing some GIS stuff to learn the program and to fill needs that we have, but there's not enough time in the day to do the 2 or 3 different jobs they're doing right now.
At least 2 or 3, yes, but that's correct.
Okay. Is this also the same GIS program that the police department is very interested in having too for mapping?
Yes. So the GIS system is a citywide system. Any division, anybody that has access to it can pull information off of it. The police could use it for, easily identifying traffic accident locations, crime statistics. The fire department, can use it for their purposes as well. You actually, it's not just a map. You actually, when you put a data point in, you can assign values to that data point that says when the last. So if it was a fire department, when was the last time they did a fire system inspection, and all that goes in there, and as well. So when you talk with strictly public works, so all of our maintenance tasks are logged in there, so that if they're heaven forbid there's a a pedestrian accident, they fall through a manhole or a water meter, you can pull that up readily and say, this was the last time it was serviced, this was when it was repaired, this was when it was installed. All that information goes in there, and it's at the fingertips of everybody. So, you know, currently when a phone call comes into my office, hey, what's happening? What's the history on this? Well, I have to say, let me call you back, and I have to go find 2 or 3 people that have historical knowledge and find that information, and, stop them from what they're doing, their daily task. We get this information, and then I call back and I say, okay, this is provide the information to the caller. That's long, it's tedious, it's time consuming. It takes away from our other daily tasks. Once this GIS system is up and running, all that essentially goes away. So anybody that has a system that gets a call like that can pull that information up and see it.
Okay, so this GIS technician, would they input the information for the fire department in it, and what the police need, or would it automatically be entered somehow?
So nothing's going to be automatically entered. So that's why you need staff to enter the data, right? And whether police or fire enter their own data, once the system's up and running, they can certainly enter their own data, enter their own layers. And they can do that. It's not going to take much time to train those folks on how to do it. The GIS technician locator that's shown here, that person's certainly able to go out and put in any information that we're requesting them to put in. Whether it's the number of stop signs we have in the city, the number of speed limit signs, the number of trees that are in the street, the areas where the sidewalks are buckling, all that will fall under that person's duties.
Okay, so this person who will be assigned this could also assist the fire and the police to be sure stuff is done correctly and everyone has it. Okay,
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wiesner.
You're welcome. So I'll give you a little anecdotal evidence here. So last year, or earlier this year, I can't recall, but we actually partnered with the Association of Washington Cities to help us start converting some of our maps into the system that have already been developed. And we got an email back from them because we're not using our contracted time. And it's essentially because the person that I have in my office, Craig Taylor, that does this work, simply does not have the time to even focus a day here, a day there to try to get this information up and running. And so every day, every year that goes by, it just puts us that much further behind, that much more information that we need to collect to go in the system. So we want to take advantage of it. It's a useful tool. It's used across the world, and we need to get on board, and we need dedicated staff to do it.
Thank you very much. I went to AWC presentation on it, and just seemed like every city, small to large, was very, very interested in it and how easily it could be accessed once the information, which didn't seem to take very long to be able to enter once you understood the program. But if we already have the program, let's be using it.
Well, and then it's not just an in-house tool. It's also there would be a public page where the public can go in and access all the information they want as well. They can see what's on their street. They can see the things that we're inputting and have that knowledge. And it works for developers. It works for the general public. So there will be a public-facing page for those folks to get on it as well.
Okay, Councillor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Bridges, for that explanation. And as you get, it's important for us to understand, these decisions we're making, moving forward over the next couple of years. So I notice you're willing to eliminate an administrative assistant position, which is almost a swap out for that GIS technician. Can you kind of address that elimination of the admin assistant position?
Yes, that would be the plan. So the elimination of the administrative assistant position, those salaries would actually go to the design engineering technician position. The GIS technician locator position would be paid for out of the utility funds.
Okay. in that design engineering technician position, we are currently contracting those services out on an as-needed per project basis, which you're stating is costing us approximately $1.8 million.
Well, yeah, so let me try to explain this one more time. So it gets kind of confusing. So the GIS tech locator would be a new position that would be paid for out of the utilities. I currently have one engineering technician in my office that is assigned everything under the sun and the moon and all the duties in between. And then we're asking for that position to be promoted to design engineering tech position, and then hire a person to fill the vacant engineering tech position that he gets promoted from. And that new hire engineering tech would then perform all the in-house engineering working with my staff engineers we have now.
They'd be able to focus, in other words, instead of being in 10 places at once, because the design engineering technician would be taking on all the GIS and other technical aspects.
Correct. Yeah, and so I would have a dedicated GIS technician. I would have a dedicated engineering technician to work with engineers on in-house design, and I would have a person, a GIS technician locator, that would assist the utilities in locating their systems and assist the GIS, the design engineering tech, to maintain the map and help build the GIS map system.
And that system then would eliminate the use of all these consulting engineers that we've been bringing in on city projects.
Yes, to a point. So the projects that I've identified, the cost savings, the $1.8 million in projects, those are projects that are water line replacements, sewer line replacements, storm drain line replacements, big projects that would involve the 24-inch transmission main. That would still go to a consultant because they have the expertise to take on those larger projects, right? Studies, those things would still go to a consultant. But after the consultant does a study and identifies potential projects, then we could look at bringing those projects in-house to do the design work instead of adding another task to a consultant to perform.
Because as you know, the money we spend on consulting engineers has been driving me nuts.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
I hear you. I've been here 2 years. I've heard it. I've heard it everywhere I go, and Oak Harbor's no different. It does drive you nuts, and it's fortunately Oak Harbor has a great core staff. We have great core engineers. I just don't have anybody dedicated or that can be dedicated to a project. That's why we have a hard time getting the small projects out the door.
Well, and the small projects are the projects that often seem like they should be the easiest, right? But
oh yeah,
when we can't control them in-house, they often become a little more complicated, don't they?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, a good example is the waterfront pedestrian project we did this year. We started that project in-house until we got to a point where we just didn't have any time to focus on it, and we were probably 90% done with it and had to ship it out to Transpo Group to finish it for us. They took it over, and it still took several reviews with their staff to get them to understand what we were trying to do. And I think we ended up paying almost $70,000 for that contract.
And on the subject of development review engineer, John Simero, do you have an idea of what kind of money he's cost for development review over the year?
Well, yeah, it's hard to talk. I mean, we paid him a lot of money, but there are 2 or 3 large projects in there that have taken the bulk of that. With those projects behind us to a certain point, we're looking in the neighborhood of probably $65,000 to $80,000 a year.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And he's providing a pretty prompt service, from what I understand.
Yes.
Okay. Well, certainly I appreciate your efforts in trying to quit driving me nuts on the consulting engineers. That's for sure. You don't want me to be nuts.
Well, I just hope Mr. Ellenberg's listening.
Well, somebody had to carry his torch, right? So, so yeah, certainly I think, certainly, and the fact you guys are willing to adjust the admin assistant position, right, which takes away some of the pain. So seems like, and obviously, like Mr. Councilmember Servadius, I'd like to see a little more detail on that $1.8 million cost reduction that we could possibly expect to just help us sleep a little better at night. But on the surface, sounds like it all makes sense. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other. We're back to Dave.
Okay. So this is a slide on, this is a citywide option regarding salaries and wages. Currently in the budget, there's no COLA budgeted. No salary increase based on the cost of living is budgeted. There are 4 different options that staff put together to show you what impact that would have on all the funds. About 2/3 of these costs are general fund and the rest are the other funds. So the impact for the first year in 2021 of a 1% COLA is $122,000, goes up to $184 for a 1.5% COLA, $245 for a 2% COLA, and $306,000 for a 2.5% COLA. 2 years, in 2022, that would be, of course, compounded. So you'd have the 1% COLA in 2021 and another 1% COLA in 2022, which is why the number is at 251 for 2022, because that number would be compounded. And then you could see the costs of all the other COLA options as well in 2022. So the total cost over 2 years for the 1% COLA would be $375,000. For 1.5% COLA, it would be about, looks like 550,000 or so. For a 2% COLA, we're looking at 750,000, and for the 2.5% COLA for all funds, it would be about $930,000. And remember, 2/3 of that cost is general fund. Are there any questions on this slide?
Councilor Servadius.
So, Mr. Goldman, I'm looking at a 1% COLA for 2021. You said it was 123,000, I'm rounding.
Correct.
Then you said the total for 2 years would be 3 something?
Yes, because what happens is you're paying $122,000 for a 1% increase, and in 2022, there'd be another 1% increase on top of that. So in 2022, it would be $251,000, because in 2022, it's like a 1% twice compounded. So the total cost, you'd have to add up the 122 plus the 251 to get the total impact on the biennial budget.
So I do compound interest for a living daily, have done it for 25 years. I don't understand, let's say we gave them the COLA, which is an increase of 122 and 221. The compounded effect of that would be 1-ish%. So the next year might cost 130. So the total of those two I could see being the 251, 102, but there's no way it can be 380-ish thousand over 2 years. That, I just can't get my head around that math.
Well, basically, if you take the salaries, if you take the salary and wage base, which is right here at $12.6 million in 2022, and you take 2% of that, you should get around $251,000. If you take this base and you take 1% of that, you get about $122,000.
Can you send me that Excel spreadsheet?
Callie is coming in.
It's a 1% increase.
Yeah, each year.
Okay.
Yeah, each year. So you get 1% in 2021 and then another 1% in 2022.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you send me that spreadsheet, please? So I can look at that
Yeah,
calculation?
we can send that to you, not a problem.
Thank you.
Kelly has it.
Councilor Heisen?
If you already said this, I apologize. I'm looking at a list of 1%, 1.5%, 2%. Are these options, or are some employees getting 1% and some employees getting 1.5% and some getting 2%?
Well, there's two types of increases employees get. They get a step increase based on where they are when they were hired and their union contracts.
Right.
Or just the regular personnel rules. And there's also a cost of living that all employees get every year, depending on what council adopts.
Right.
And also, just to explain that compounding effect real quick, if you have $1 and the first year, let's say you get 10% on the dollar, you get $1.10. And let's say the second year comes around, you get another 10% on top. It's not on top of $1, you get 10% on top of $1.10. So the second year, you're going to get 10% on top of $1.10. That's 11. That's 11 cents. So the second year, you're going to end up with you're going to end up with $1.21. So the first year, you're going to have $1.10, and the second year, you're going to have $1.21. But what's the total increase over the original dollar that you had? The first year increase will be 10 cents, and the second year increase will be 11 cents. So the total increase from the original dollar base that you had is 21 cents, which is why you see it the way it is over here in 2022. I don't know if that helps or whatnot, but I'm just trying to explain how it works over here.
So David, I'll answer Tara's, our Councilmember Heisen, I should talk more formal here, question here. This is across the board for all 5 of the 4 unions and the non-reps. So they could come in differently. Typically, we haven't budgeted if we didn't have the wages already done. We didn't budget the continuing year, and you went ahead and passed the option for the non-reps if you decide to give unions union raises in the spring, then you can go back retroactively, and because we have that option of that resolution that we passed and make it retroactively. But normally, it's real easy to do retroactively for bargaining units, but it's really, the only way we were able to do that, you reserved that right by doing a resolution ahead of time so that you can retro it back. But certainly, I think we had some numbers, it was a little bit cheaper if you just wanted to do the non-reps in there and then come back and do the other components. We can break that down by bargaining unit if you want, but this is a cumulative number. Yeah.
Any other?
Chief Dresker, can I just add something real quick to that?
Hi, Chief. Go ahead.
So, Tara, also just so you understand, so when you're looking at these, obviously with the negotiations aspect with unions, this will vary a little based on that negotiations that Blaine had talked about and what they're looking at her for and what the city's looking at her for. So that's a negotiation between the city and the unions, just to let you know.
Thank you, Chief. So we are, I guess, done with our first section here. I'm wondering about, we're 2.5 hours into this, wondering if anybody needs a break. If not, we'll just continue on.
Yeah, can we do 5 minutes?
How much time?
5 minutes?
5 minutes? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break at this point, and we'll just reconvene 5 minutes from now. 4:30.
Yeah. Easy math, 4:40.
So I'd like to reconvene this special workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. We've been on break for a few minutes here. It is November 12th, and the meeting started at 2 p.m. It's now 4:43. Call the meeting back to order at this time. I think Councilor Heisen had to run to her house, which is a short ways away, and she will be back joining us again. Otherwise, we have a full council. Some are on their videos participating, and we have soon-to-be 4 councilors here. So let's get back to our agenda, and I think at this time, we're going to turn it back to our Finance Director, Dave Goldman, and Dave's going to talk about the continuing department budget detail. Dave?
All right, we have the budget department detail. We have the line item breakdown for departments that we sent to you as well earlier this week. But in the interest of time, we also want to go over capital projects during this meeting. And in the interest of time, we were thinking, since we're going to be doing the departmental breakdowns next week, that we can do it then, and we can move on to the capital projects for the remainder of this meeting.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead then? I don't see any questions at this point.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. This is Jessica Dela Cruz, by the way. So I figured that just to, again, on the interest of time, we would just go through any capital projects that City Council might have any questions about. And so I'm hoping that I'm sharing my screen correctly. You are. Okay, perfect. So this is just the 2021-2026 summary that has all of the capital projects listed. And so if City Council has any questions about any capital projects that have been presented on this list, I believe we provided it to you on the PDF file and the Excel file as well for the ease of reading the data. So if City Council has any questions about any at this time, we would like to try and answer them.
And Jessica,
Councilor,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to call on Councilor Servadius. Start with Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Jessica. I don't know at this point if I have questions on this. I guess what I want to know, and maybe we'll be covering it, sounds like next week, is I'd love to do all of these if we can afford it, but I want to make sure, you know, we've got the personnel side of the house covered first, basically the operations, before we start adding projects. So I'm going to sit here and go through this list some more, if any of my peers do, but we'll be covering, Mr. Goldman, did you infer that we would cover that side of the house next week?
Yeah, we'll be covering the departmental budgets next week. The department directors will be giving their presentations, and there'll be some line item detail in those presentations as well that you also can find in the backup for this meeting that we sent to you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Munns?
Thank you, Mayor. I took down my hand. I want to review it more and then hear I'm particularly interested in the police chief and the cameras that we, in a sense, okay to buy at this point, if it would be part of this year or if we'll continue next, but I'll wait for his presentation to find that out. Thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just a couple of questions on a couple of smaller ticket items. First off, I don't know that we've discussed much or heard much from you involving the thought on the Would-Be Homeless Coalition contribution. I assume you're kind of thinking that if they're able to get that facility that they're trying to purchase, that the city would have some contribution to that?
Yes. The coalition actually came to us some time ago and talked about their endeavor to buy that by that piece of property down there by, in the middle of the island down by Island Transit. And so, you know, we have obviously some contribution to that homeless coalition that we've done each year. As you can see, that we, you know, put a small stipend in our options here, but we also, I'll let Blaine speak to this. I think we have the potential commitment to make a one-time only in the event they can consummate a deal on that property to help acquire that.
Yeah.
Well, in the end, we would end up then with an island-wide permanent shelter, which I think is something we've all been hoping at least would occur to make it so that, you know, we have the ability to centralize those facilities. So, the one-time commitment, we're not committing anything as far as ongoing maintenance or anything outside of maybe the stipend we've been offering in the past.
That is correct. Nothing else committed. You know, what I did is after the coalition contacted me, I had a conversation with the staff at at one of our weekly staff meetings, and we kind of brainstormed. You know, I mean, wish we could find more money to offer at this point for a number of reasons, but. That's correct. Short answer is no additional commitment beyond what you see.
All right, thank you. And then Mr. Bridges, can you update us on I see the lagoon bridge replacements on this is a new line item for next year. Can you kind of update us where that's at?
Yeah, so earlier this year, I believe in February, right before Mr. Powers left, we came to the council to participate with the Rotary in replacing the lagoon bridge. The original money was spent to hire a consultant to review the existing bridge and determine if the structure, the concrete piers and abutments, could handle the load of the new bridge. And through that process, it was identified by the consulting engineer that the bridge itself was actually in pretty good shape. And so we had been working, we being myself, Mr. Oborn, the mayor, and others have been working with the Rotary to refocus their money to making some necessary repairs to the bridge and then updating it to give it a fresher look. And so that's where we're at. The Rotary has agreed that they can shift their money to pay for the updating, freshen the bridge up. And so they need to have their money, I think, expended by March or May of 2021.
Great.
So they can hit that deadline.
All right, thank you for that. Those were the only questions I have for the moment, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius.
Is there any way, for simplicity's sake, that I'm not seeing, as we go through some of these and I pick a project like the GIS locator truck, it's on our page 65, I guess. So that's kind of an optional one, depending on whether or not that position is approved. I just picked one to look at. Is there any way to identify on all of these which are in the budget already? Are they only the ones that say if they're in progress, or how do we know for sure? Is there any way to decipher what's maybe already in the budget? And you may have said this last time when we were looking at these sheets.
So this is Jessica speaking. All of these are included in the budget with the exception of, in 2021, it's this battery-powered hydraulic extrication tools, as this is contingent upon grant funding received, but everything else has been included as part of the final budget or the preliminary budget numbers that you guys have been seeing. So we did build in the transfers, the project costs, and let me just go through the list real quick. This is one that is not included, as this was presented as an option. And I believe everything else is included. Yes.
All right, thank you.
That is correct.
Counselor Wiesner. Did I do that right?
Sorry, Mayor, I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay. Counselor Goebel.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question in regards to the line item for the new financial system. I know we're going to learn, obviously, much more details about it next week, but I just was curious in the language in the mayor's preliminary budget on page, if anyone wants to go to it, it's on page 89. It just describes in the first sentence, project need, the city's current financial software system, Eden is outdated and will eventually be unsupported. I was curious, when you say unsupported, does that mean it's going to be obsolete? Like how the iPhone is changing its charging cord. Eventually, the charging cord will be completely, you can't even use it. So is there a pretty serious timeline with this program? Is it going to be completely unusable, outdate, cannot be used by 2022? Just curious how quick this has to happen. Thank you.
I believe that the information that this came from was from our interim finance director. It was Mike Bailey that did his research. I am not sure if they're on the timeline when this will be unsupported. So if Tally and/or David might have some information on that, you guys could chime in to help out.
This is Dave Goldman, finance director here. Yeah, I'm familiar with various accounting systems and enterprise resource planning systems throughout, in my work throughout various places in the country. And Eden is kind of an older product. They're still supporting it now. Tyler wants people to move to their newer system. I'm not sure the date though, but eventually what happens when a piece of software is no longer supported, it doesn't mean you can't use it, but they're not going to update it. They're not going to provide any support. So if there's something goes wrong, or if there's a mismatch with the numbers, or there's an error, they're not going to provide that support. You'll just have to figure it out with your own IT staff, what went wrong. But we can certainly find out, unless Blaine or somebody else has more details as to what Tyler Technologies has told folks. We can certainly find out when they're anticipating ending support.
Yeah, and David, I think you answered it very good. Yeah, they haven't given us any timeline when they're going to stop supporting it. So, but they certainly are encouraging people to migrate to a more supported and advanced system. And it's like the update that was given at a council meeting by our consultant Mike Bailey. There's certainly a lot more bells and whistles and a lot more technology that would improve the efficiency. I think I would have liked to have budgeted this in the budget, but a lot of it's general fund, and the general fund didn't have a lot of funds, so I had to cut $500,000 out of expenditures you don't even see in the mayor's budget to get it to where it is, and then now I'm throwing an option of another $600,000 in cuts to get it to be where you might be more comfortable. So I think it's a vital system and really needs to be done. I think all we did budgeted in the 21 and 22 budget is the $25,000, and then we're going to assume the council would budget the additional amount in the subsequent years. So a really vital thing. And there's one advantage of doing it in the year that we're not doing budgets. So with the biannual budget, so that would be a good year to do the conversion. So there's an advantage of doing that in a year later, but certainly I think sooner or later. And executive time was kind of a challenge that we had, and going to old technology was one of the things we ran into. And so certainly if we went to some of the other accounting systems, they may have components that are already part of it. And they're usually a plethora of menus they give you when you do an accounting system. You can add different components and you kind of shop on what components you want. So it'll be exciting time, but we went ahead and put the $25,000 for a consultant to start the process in 2022 in the budget. And then the items you're funding the 21 and 22, except for the one option that she pointed out there that was an option. and then the 2023 and to 2026. Those are just forecasted, and those kind of tie in, and we have to do, on the other side, on the comprehensive plan side, we have to do a capital planning, so we want to go 6 years out, but it makes sense to do your planning and kind of know where you're at. So that's why we do this as a 6-year plan, but essentially in the capital, in the funding, in the budget process, and how it integrates into the operating fund for paying for everything, it's just those 2 years, are 21 and 22 are integrated into the actual funding.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I would like to see this in there. It just seems astounding that we're still having people hand enter timesheets over and over again. And I think we're going to be in a reality check when we find out how expensive it is to go to piecing all the program together. And I'd rather get started so that we have a better idea for our next budget on how we're going to come up with it. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of different staff members to check and recheck, and someone has to hand enter all that stuff in. So somehow it seems like we need to find this 25,000.
The 25,000 is in there. What's not in there is the 280. That's projected for 2023. So getting it started in 2022 is in the budget.
Okay, Councillor Heisen?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Oborn, you mentioned Executime, and that was a fairly recent, pretty significant investment. What is the difference between the new finance system and Executime, and or what, or am I confusing two completely different things?
It does kind of tie together. So in the presentation that Mike Bailey gave on it, one of the recommendations he had is you were kind of throwing a old system onto an old system, and it makes more sense to put your efforts in upgrading the existing base system and then doing add-ons at a newer level. Because one of the things we had to do was an old technology, we had to get something that was old to begin with and not heavily supported. So the choice was to walk away from Executime, push towards getting the upgrading, and then look at a time system that would integrate with our new system. So that's the direction we're going in.
Yeah, I think integration and eliminating redundancy is certainly key, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think Mr. Oborn has been negotiating with Executime to get some of our money back, and it was, I know he has, and has been successful. That's a trail that we probably should have started on about a year ago or a year and a half ago, maybe. So anyway, we'll get there, but. So, anyone else for any questions at this point? So, I'm not seeing any. So I want to congratulate Dave Goldman for getting through this today. And I want to say thank you very much, because I know you've had a lot thrown on your desk, and you've been a real pro at you keep smiling and keep working. I know you're working very hard, and I appreciate that. So I know the rest of the staff is working hard too. This time of, especially based on what we've been through, the pandemic that started, it's just been a really interesting year, and I've heard it called a lot of other things, but it's been an interesting year for everybody, and I know our staff has been scratching their heads. They've been working extra hard. They've been trying to work as a team to find solutions. And so, thank you, and we'll have some more meetings on this. Councillor Servadius?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you line out, I've made some notes here and highlighted things that I think are important to me. Where do you see us, or how do you want this information conveyed? For example, if I said I absolutely want new permitting software to make it into the budget, when do we have that discussion?
David, you want to answer that? Or I can.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the sooner the better.
I was going to
So
say,
we can make those adjustments in the budget, but we should put all the information together so we can bring it back to council and have council, take a look at it and deliberate and, see if they all agree, because, there might be something one or two council members want, but the majority don't want. So it'd be good to get your ideas together, what should be in the budget or what should be taken out of the budget, provide that to the city clerk. If you can do that relatively soon, Thursday, I mean, sometime next week, it's probably not going to be ready. I don't know if you're going to be able to do it in time for the next meeting, but if you can get it by Monday, that would help. But if you can't, we can put it together for, the December 1st or for another workshop or whatnot.
Since we're all here, I don't know if we have an ending time. Is there any reason not to discuss that right now? If anyone has any strong thoughts?
I'm fine. We don't have a cutoff time here.
Nope.
So the floor is yours.
Tara, would you like to start? I'll just jump in. A couple of things that stood out to me. Main Street, we talked about that. I've seen a significant improvement downtown, so I probably support the .09 funds there going that way. The $9,000, I would probably keep it at $9,000. The Homeless Coalition, if we do the 50,000 is a separate thing, correct, Mayor? Or
So let me back up just a second. You just said .09 funds?
Sorry, B&O tax, yeah, I misspoke.
Oh,
B&O
okay,
tax,
okay,
B&O
okay.
tax.
I got you. Yep.
So I would support keeping it at 9,000 to the Homeless Coalition. I want to hear more about the new permitting software. I don't know if there's someone in a moment that would like to speak to that. We kind of skipped over that, but I am intrigued by that. That was at the beginning before we started asking hard questions. If that somehow increases productivity and gets building permits moving forward, I'm all for that. The park specialist, I'm neutral on that. I'm a big parks guy, so I want to support that, but I know there's only so much money around. I do support the paver. That seems like that makes sense and can save us money, increase productivity. I support keeping of the water specialist. That's not really a change unless we make it a change, so I support that. I support the GIS, basically all those changes that Mr. Bridges described with getting a GIS technician / part-time locator. It sounds like those duties would be split about 50-50, and then making the changes regarding the design engineering technician that gets, I think that was a promotion, and then we bring in an internal review engineer. So the wash of that appears to be a little bit of a promotion and adding a body. So there is an add there. The COLAs, I'm going to put the screws to you again, Mr. Goldman. I don't mean, please don't take it personally, but I really want to go through that math. That's something that, while we've traditionally done, I don't know if there were a few years when I first came on council that we weren't able to do that. And so I want to be able to support everyone equally there. If we can factor in something, 1.5%, but this may be a year that doesn't occur. So those are the initial thoughts that I had on the options.
Councillor Goebel.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some initial thoughts as well. There's other items on these, projects that I haven't quite made my mind up on yet. But I personally would really like to see that economic development specialist be included. I think that's really important for the overall goals of the community, especially coming out of the pandemic, trying to recruit businesses and just promoting our local economy, I think is going to be real, and to have a centralized plan and strategies and a way to measure results from that position. Maybe you have some standards that have to be met within a certain time, but I really feel strongly about that. As well as the paver, just hearing the department talk about the returns that they would have on that paver. I think it'll pay for itself so quickly. And then lastly, Rick Omberg would be so happy to hear me say this. I also agree with the design engineering technician that it'll save $1.8 million in consulting fees. I think that's, in my mind, a no-brainer, but those are the three big ticket items right now I see. And I guess lastly, the water fund, since that's already in the budget, I would like to keep that there. I think it's important to make sure our water quality stays, premier. But yeah, those are my initial feelings about what we discussed this evening. Thank you.
Councillor Heisen.
Just throwing this out there, and again, I'd like to review the MRSC data on the economic development specialist. I do think that that's something that we need in terms of paying for itself or seeing the returns during a particularly tight year. How do we feel about that being a part-time position? Would that not be a thing? Could that be done?
Yeah, we could, and what it was done at one time was a shared position where the person was a long-term planner and a economic development specialist, so they did do it that way at one time. Or we could just see what in the community, if there's somebody available part-time. There's quite a lot of people out there, but so certainly that's an option, and so we can look at a part-time.
I think that maybe that moving ahead, I'm hedging on the full-time expense, but I would absolutely support a part-time or maybe three-quarter time, and then if we're seeing results, then we could move that into a full-time position. I think that's the only question I have on this.
We actually did discuss that idea to some degree. We don't have a plan, but yeah, thank you. I have spoken recently with Sabrina about trying to do an ad hoc committee regarding economic development and especially to discuss the recovery. I mean, I'm privy to some numbers that have to be careful about how they're shared, but still, I think that we could brainstorm some as a committee and make a plan. So I might call on one or two of you to help out. So join us in that effort.
On that, I know I said I was done, but I lied. On that note, the parks specialist, I do agree, especially with the investment that we've been making in our parks, that I'm sure taking on that workload with a pretty downsized department is a challenge, but would maybe having a part-time park specialist be better than not having one at all in terms of adding new staff at this time? So just kind of what's bouncing around in my head right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Mack?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I agree with Councilman Goebel and Councilwoman Heisen. We started with, at the retreat, I believe our economic development person is vital, whether we want to do it in-house, whether we want to have another individual, but I think that's very important moving forward. If we can use personnel on hand and develop more time for that, I'm okay with that, but I think it's an important item. I'm really not in favor of supporting an additional parks individual. There's a lot of money going to the parks already. Some of it's been already allocated, some of it's new. I'm in favor of, I can support the paving equipment and the new personnel with the shop facility. I think that's going to be important. It'll help us facilitate a lot more quicker repairs, more efficiency, and for now, I'm good, but would like to question some of these expenses in the storm drain on these feasibility studies, on the Friend Marsh. A lot of money's being thrown at that. I'm not sure what we're still trying to figure out down there. I thought a lot of this has already been figured out, but again, I'm just not a big fan of throwing more money at that because we've already found a lot of things out that we know what we need to do. So with that, I'll be it. Thank you.
Move on to Councillor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I have a few just closing thoughts on some of these items. As far as the economic development coordinator, the only issue I have with doing that as a part-time position is I think we kind of learned maybe that it's really hard to find the caliber of person we would be looking for to fill that position in a part-time position. And, you know, I'd hate to do it halfway again, right? And so I think there's money to be scraped together somewhere within our budget to fund that money we're already spending elsewhere. And so certainly that information that Mr. Goldman's going to gather up involving some of those outlays in economic development area right now is going to help maybe guide that a little bit. The Main Street deal, you know, I'm certainly mixed emotion about that, just again, from the standpoint of whether or not our eggs in a bunch of different baskets, but at the same time, I think the organization's done some great things. I am concerned about, in looking at their budget, seeing a line item there for the expenses for the attorneys, but there was no income, you know, that was offsetting that outside of their normal income. You know, so maybe we can get an explanation back from Mr. Evans involving that through our city administrator. Fire department, I certainly hand it to them for tossing some, you know, money in the pool every time we ask for them to give, they give. And of course, now they're actually asking us to start thinking about funding engines and stuff. And certainly that's an item that we're going to have to sit and look and discuss. Bonding those engines is certainly not the most ideal situation, using a bonding capacity for that. Certainly being able to have a fund set aside for those moving forward is at least something we got to look hard at, whether it be now during these uncertain times or as we're moving forward, it needs to be in the forefront. Involving the park specialists, I certainly think we have to live within our means. We have to make sure that we're operating a tight ship, especially in tight times. You know, we've got folks in our community that are tightening up their belts, and we have to do a bit of that too. But at the same time, there are certain things we are here to provide for our folks. You know, certainly streets, water, sewer. You know, police and fire protection are basic necessities that any community has to supply. But so are parks. You know, and the reality, healthy parks and a healthy parks department typically makes for a healthy community. I think as we come out of this COVID issue, especially the children of our community are going to need us and our parks even more than they did in the past. Certainly, they've gone through things that we never thought we would go through as adults in our lifetime. And you know, and I can remember back in my day, you know, when the Parks Department ran tennis lessons. I mean, a whole myriad of summer programs that kept the youth engaged and gave us something to do outside. And because of that, I would, I think, support doing as much as we can in the Parks Department. Again, especially knowing coming out of the backside of this, it's going to be needed more, and it's just a basic need that we need to provide to our constituents. So those are my thoughts there, and certainly I'm in support, as you know, of the paving purchase, equipment, machinery. I think that's a piece of machinery that in the long run is going to save us a ton of money. As our infrastructure continues to age, it's only going to be needed more and more. And I think it's a piece of equipment that's held us back from some proper maintenance, in the past. In the water department, the water specialist, I certainly understand our public work director's thoughts on that, and we certainly have to listen to them. They know more about that than we do. Certainly, I know regulations continue to mount up, but we've also had efficiencies in those areas. We've gone to electronic read meters, versus manual read meters that we had back in the old days, and that's something I guess I'd like to have to explore more before I made a decision on. And on the engineering side, yes, let's figure out a way to get as few consulting engineers in here as possible. The more we can do in-house within reason makes sense. Obviously, development review engineer based upon previous year's expenses, it sounds like, and moving forward, it sounds like that would not be a cost saver for the community or a time saver. It sounds like we're getting fast reviews back from Semeru, and it's saving us money. But certainly the GIS tech, that is a long-term investment, again, that we're going to be making in infrastructure, which is a basic city service, understanding where our pipes are located, and mapping everything as we're moving forward and as we're gaining that information, rather than continually having to back build it. Certainly makes sense, and is a basic city service, and by all means having a in-house design engineer tech that can focus on design engineer and not a million different things makes sense, especially since they're giving up a admin assistant to gain that. And as far as the COLA, I guess I just, certainly I want to sit down and put some serious thought to this. We're looking at a less than, I think, 0.5% of inflationary rate in 2020. Whether or not that's going to continue into 2021, 2022, obviously is yet to be seen. I know the Fed's watching it carefully. In order to maybe help Mr. Servadius understand it, because I understand it, what they're talking about is if you give them a 1% in 2021 and then another 1% in 2022, that means you're giving them 1% in 2021 and 2% in 2022 from the current 2020 budget. And that's why the numbers skew like that, because it's 1% in 2021 and then actually 2% over the current rate in 2022. Although it'd be only a 1% increase in 2021. And then there's a little compounding in there for the, $12,000 odd dollars or $1,200 odd dollars for the 1% compound. So I have to put some more thought to that. But those are my general thoughts on the items presented tonight. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Is Ms. Rosen still on? I'd like to ask her, how many full-time, including your director of parks, how many full-time park people do we have on salary currently?
Oh my goodness, let me look that up right now. We currently have 6.0 FTEs and 2 seasonal employees.
Okay, and at times, I believe we've been down 2 or 3 employees at the same time.
Yes, during this past spring, summer with COVID, we had 2 employees that were out for quite a lengthy period of time. during our really busy season, and other divisions had to step in and help just to keep things maintained under control.
And if I understood you correctly, by filling this open position that's been here for a while, that would hold us, even with improvements to limited, but still being able to develop the new park. I mean, we have how many acres total of all the parks in the city that we need? 6 people. These wouldn't even be working right now because it's fall. Fall and winter, they don't work. So we have 6.
Yeah.
Just
So,
approximately.
So I don't think I have it broken down exactly like that. I've got a memo here that I started. Where is it? I just had it in my hand. Okay, I'm not finding it now, but anyway, okay, so what we had we had 7 FTEs in 2010, and then the recession hit, and we had to lay one person off, or they actually got transferred to another position, division that had an opening. Let's see, we have a network of parks and trails totaling 124 developed acres. We have the 75 acres of undeveloped property and 72.6 acres of open space. And parks also takes care of the landscaping at city facilities, except for the fire department and the marina. So what I believe that we have, if we had a new position and we got back up to the 2010 staffing levels, we can take on all of the additional work that's at Windjammer, and phase 1 of the Harbor Heights development, which is a couple new soccer fields. Once we get into future phases of that, beyond this budget, this biennial budget, we'll have to look and see, but that's probably another 4 or 5 years out before we would have to look at adding, I would think.
Okay, and if we had this additional full-time, then next year for seasonal, we may not need them or just need one. I mean, I'm throwing stuff out.
I think I would let the new parks manager look at that. Again, a lot of it depends also on special events because parks is heavily involved in special events. We weren't able to have the special events in Windjammer that we had hoped to because of COVID this year. So, the plan was to try to have more special events in Windjammer, and that requires a lot of parks staff time during that season, like April through September.
So we really won't know until they raise us from a 3-2 phase of COVID to 4 and went on. And we really don't know. The vaccine's hopeful, but usually it takes 2 to 3 years for a vaccine to be given before they know if it's even going to work. So they would still probably have, I'm just saying, restrictions. Unless I can see otherwise, I would like to see the parks just because that is a huge investment in our youth. As Councilman Wiesner said, I have seen more people during this late summer, fall, of families together, mom and dad with the kids during this COVID. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime real soon. As far as the COLAs, I would love to do it, but I'm a firm believer, non-representative and the representative, they all get the same or no one gets anything. Everybody does their fair share. We're all on a team, and I still firmly believe in that. I'd like to see the MRSC report on economic development, but the Chamber and Main Street, I think, add a lot towards it. May not be exactly pulling in, going out headhunting in a sense for business to come here, but it doesn't hurt when they do the image when businesses look at how strong your chamber is. And I believe it's, Mr. Servatius would know, it's well over 400 members. That's more than Bellevue. The city of Bellevue has as chamber members. So that means a lot to businesses when they see what's active in your city or not. So I would like to see our support stay for both of them. It makes sense, as Mr. Wiesner said, to we can get rid of some of those consultants and do it in-house and cheaper. As far as the GSI and redesigning on things like that. And I'm sorry, we got to keep ahead of permitting. We need that water specialist. I don't want to get in trouble with the health department. We barely got by with the skin of our teeth when the plant went down in Windjammer Park, the wastewater, that we could still have hookups. So I think we need to stay on top of that. And that's about all for right now. I can just say that's what I see for now. So I look at things. Thank you.
Councillor Wiesner? Councillor Wiesner, did you have any additional questions? Doesn't sound like it, maybe. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Wassinger? Anybody? I don't see her here. She's, okay. Okay. How about here? Anybody here? We've got a lot of film to look at now. I didn't write all this down, but that's why we have it on video. That's why we have a great city clerk up there and a great staff. So if there is no other business at this time, I will call this meeting adjourned, and thank you.